You've been lied to about control. They told you that if you just try harder, plan more, push through, life will finally go your way. That success, love, peace, all of it comes from forcing the pieces to fit. But if that were true, why are you still exhausted? Why does your chest tighten when things don't go as planned? Why does your mind spin late at night, replaying every detail, every what if? The truth is, forcing outcomes doesn't give you peace. It steals it. It keeps you trapped, chasing, gripping, afraid to let go. But Buddhism shows a different way, a way that feels like breathing after holding your breath for years, a way that teaches you can still care without clinging. You can still act without obsession. You can still want without suffering. Tonight, as you listen to these lessons, your grip will begin to loosen. Not because you've given up, but because you're waking up. You'll feel something inside you soften. A quiet voice whispering, "You don't have to hold so tightly anymore." And when you wake up tomorrow, you'll see that life flows better when you stop trying to control the river. This isn't just a sleep audio. This is a shift, a letting go, a return to peace. Are you ready? Let's begin. You've felt it before, that quiet tension beneath your ribs, the ache of wanting something to happen so badly it keeps you awake at night. It's not always loud. Sometimes it shows up as overthinking, restlessness, or that feeling that you're not doing enough, and the more you try to force it, the job, the relationship, the goal, the more it slips away. It feels like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it leaks through your fingers. So tonight, we go deeper, past the surface noise, past the need to make everything turn out right. This lesson is about intention, not the desperate kind, not the demanding kind, but the kind that comes from deep wisdom, the kind that lets you care fully, act clearly, and then let go without fear. Not because you've stopped caring, but because you've finally learned the art of trusting. This is where control ends and peace begins. Buddhism doesn't ask you to stop desiring or trying. It doesn't teach you to float through life without goals. What it does show is that freedom comes from acting with full presence and zero attachment. This is the paradox. You set your intention, you give your whole heart, but you release the demand for a certain outcome. You don't stop moving forward. You just stop dragging resistance behind you. In the West, we're taught to chase things with intensity, hustle, grind, visualize your future and force it into being. But here's the truth no one talks about. Forcing creates tension, and tension is the enemy of flow. When you operate from force, you're not living, you're bracing. You're negotiating with reality instead of meeting it. It's no wonder so many people reach their goals only to feel empty inside. Because the destination was never the problem. It was the weight they carried trying to get there. Holding intention in a Buddhist way is like standing in the middle of a river. You're grounded. You know the direction you want to face, but you allow the water to move around you. You don't fight it. You don't demand that it change. You adjust your stance and move with it. There's still effort. It's just no longer desperate. This begins with a deep shift in mindset, understanding the difference between attachment and intention. Attachment says, I need this to happen so I can be okay. Intention says, I move in this direction because it feels aligned, but I trust what comes. Attachment is conditional. It ties your peace to something outside you. Intention is rooted in clarity and inner alignment. It's already whole before anything happens. Many people confuse letting go with apathy. They think releasing control means giving up or not caring, but that's not the Buddhist way. True letting go is not turning your back on what matters. It's turning toward it with open hands. You still plant the seeds. You still show up every day with your heart in it. But you stop grasping, because you've seen what grasping does to your spirit. Grasping shrinks you. It pulls you out of the moment and into a place of fear. Suddenly, your actions aren't coming from love or truth. They're coming from lack. You're not offering your best. You're begging for security. And it never works. The outcome you're chasing starts to feel like a hostage. That energy pushes it further away. Buddhist wisdom teaches that the root of suffering is tanha, craving, clinging. But it also teaches about chanda, wholesome desire. One destroys peace. The other supports it. The difference lies in the energy behind it. Craving says, I can't be okay unless I get this. Wholesome desire says, I move toward this with care, but I remain whole either way. This subtle shift changes everything. When you let go of the need to control the result, your actions become more powerful, not less. You're no longer weighed down by fear of failure. You're no longer acting to fill a hole. You're simply doing what needs to be done with clarity and steadiness. You don't rush. You don't hesitate. You move from truth, not from panic. Letting go of outcomes also creates space for something even better than you imagined. Because here's the truth. We rarely know what's actually best for us. What looks like failure in the moment often leads to unexpected growth, new paths, or deeper lessons. But when you're clinging to one version of success, you can't see the other doors that are opening around you. You're too busy banging on the one that's locked. This is where faith comes in. Not blind faith, but a kind of grounded trust in the intelligence of life. A trust that says, if I move with integrity and let go of force, the right things will unfold in the right time. This isn't laziness, it's surrender backed by effort. It's showing up fully without trying to strangle life into submission. Even in meditation, this paradox appears. You sit with the intention to be present, to observe your breath. But the moment you try to force silence, it escapes you. The harder you push away thoughts, the louder they get. Real peace comes when you stop fighting the mind. You acknowledge its movement and stop chasing it. This is a skill that applies to everything. Relationships, goals, healing. You set your direction, you bring your heart, and then you let go of needing it to turn out a certain way. Because you've learned the difference between love and attachment, between purpose and pressure. There's a story often shared in Buddhist circles. A monk holding a cup of tea. When asked if he's afraid it might fall, he says, "This cup is already broken, not because it's worthless, but because he understands impermanence. He drinks from it with full appreciation because he's accepted its eventual end. He holds it gently, not fearfully." This is how we hold our intentions. We move with purpose, we show up with love, but we hold everything lightly. We understand that nothing is promised, and that's what makes it precious. The tighter you cling, the more you suffer. The lighter your grip, the more fully you can live. When you stop forcing, your nervous system starts to relax. You sleep better, you breathe deeper, you stop rehearsing arguments in your head or scripting your future like a movie. You begin to trust your own ability to meet life as it comes, not as you demand it to be. And this trust is power. It's not loud or aggressive. It's the quiet strength of knowing who you are without needing everything to go your way. It's the kind of presence that turns goals into expressions of love, not desperation. And it's magnetic, because people can feel when you're not grasping. They feel the peace you carry. They feel your clarity. And ironically, the less you force, the more things begin to flow. Buddhism doesn't ask you to stop caring about your dreams. It teaches you to stop suffering for them. You stop believing that peace is waiting at the end of some perfect outcome. You realize it's here now, in the way you breathe, the way you walk, the way you meet this moment with presence. Everything you're looking for in the future already exists in how you show up now, not someday, now. So tonight, as you lie in bed, let that truth wash over you. Feel the tension you've been carrying, the expectations, the timelines, the pressure, and then let it all fall away like dust from your skin. You've done enough for today. You've tried. You've shown up. Now let the universe carry the rest. No more gripping, no more waiting for things to be perfect before you feel peace. Let this be the night you stop forcing outcomes and start remembering your own power. Because the deepest strength is quiet. The real magic is already inside you. And peace begins the moment you stop fighting what already is. Let go now. Let the mind rest. Let life unfold. And just like that, the grip softens. You begin to feel what it's like to want something deeply without holding it by the throat. You move from the hunger to control into the space where intention breathes. But what now? If you're not clinging, not pushing, not forcing, then how do you live? How do you keep going without falling into passivity or drift? This is where non-striving begins. It's one of the most misunderstood teachings in Buddhism. People here don't strive and think it means doing nothing, floating through life, becoming disconnected or indifferent. But non-striving is not about quitting. It's not about letting life toss you around. It's about effort that flows, not effort that fights. It's about doing fully and still being at peace, whether or not it goes your way. There is a certain energy in striving, a sharp edge. You can feel it when it's there. That sense that if you stop for even a second, you'll lose everything. It keeps your body tense and your breath shallow. It says, more is better. Keep going. Don't rest. But non-striving brings a different kind of energy. It's steady, grounded, awake. It moves with care, not with panic. It listens. It responds. It's not trying to win. It's trying to be honest. To understand non-striving, you have to shift your relationship with effort itself. In striving, effort is tied to proving. It says, I must do this so I can finally feel worthy. In non-striving, effort is simply expression. It says, I do this because it feels right, and the act itself is the value. One leaves you drained, the other leaves you alive. Buddhism teaches that clinging is the source of suffering. But striving is often just another form of clinging, disguised as productivity, disguised as ambition. It's clinging dressed in the clothes of achievement, and while the world may applaud it, it keeps you stuck in a cycle of never enough. Non-striving doesn't mean you give up on your goals. It means you stop using them to beat yourself. You stop measuring your worth by how fast you get there. You stop chasing outcomes like they owe you something. You do the work because the work matters. You show up fully, but you let go of the pressure to be somewhere else. In meditation, this becomes crystal clear. You sit with the breath. The mind wanders. You bring it back. If you strive, if you try to force the mind into silence, it rebels, it tightens. But if you gently return to the breath with patience, without demand, something shifts. The mind starts to settle on its own. You're not pushing, you're allowing. This is non-striving in motion. The same applies to daily life. Whether you're writing, cooking, speaking, or solving a problem, non-striving asks you to bring your full attention without the weight of "this must succeed." That doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've separated care from control. You've stopped believing that only one result will make the effort worthwhile. In the Zen tradition, they speak of chopping wood and carrying water, not as chores, but as sacred acts. The doing is the practice. The point is not to finish. The point is to be there, to feel the rhythm of your movement, the breath in your lungs, the simplicity of the present moment. When you live this way, everything becomes meaningful, not because it leads somewhere, but because it is somewhere. Non-striving allows you to rest even while in motion. There's no tension behind it. You're not constantly leaning into the future. You're just fully in what's here. That presence creates ease, and that ease makes you more effective, not less. Because you're no longer driven by fear or scarcity. You're driven by alignment. This doesn't mean effort disappears. It means the nature of effort transforms. Instead of pushing from the outside in, you move from the inside out. You don't need to be motivated by pressure. You're moved by clarity. The action flows naturally because it's coming from the right place, not from trying to escape where you are. Striving often makes you blind to what's happening now. It traps you in the belief that better is always somewhere else, that the real moment, the real success, the real peace is just one step ahead. But non-striving teaches that this moment is already enough, that you don't have to delay your peace until everything is perfect. This doesn't mean you deny challenge or ambition, but you stop making your happiness dependent on them. You can pursue your dreams and still be content now. You can grow without self-rejection. Non-striving says, you are allowed to be in process. It honors the becoming, not just the result. It's especially powerful in relationships. When you stop striving to change others, to fix them, or to make them fit your script, something changes. People feel safer. You become more present, more compassionate. You start seeing others for who they are, not for who you need them to be. And that space, that non-demanding presence, creates deeper connection than any force ever could. Even in healing, this teaching is vital. When you strive to be better too fast, you often suppress or rush through your own emotions. You pressure yourself into progress. But non-striving allows you to meet yourself exactly as you are. You stop fighting your pain, and in that stillness, the real healing begins. not by fixing, but by accepting. The wound stops being something wrong with you and starts being part of your human experience. This also applies to creativity. Striving clutters the mind. It chokes inspiration. You get caught in perfectionism, fear of failure, doubt. But when you stop pushing, ideas begin to flow again. You tap into something deeper. You create not for approval, but because it's part of your nature. Non-striving restores that quiet joy in making things just for the sake of it. In work, this can feel like a paradox. We're trained to equate success with relentless pressure. But the most impactful work often comes from non-striving, from people who are deeply present, not panicked, who act with calm commitment, not chaos, who do their best and then let it go. That energy creates better outcomes, not worse. This is also true in learning. When you strive too much to understand, the mind becomes tense. But when you relax and let the information come in naturally, it integrates. You don't have to force growth. You create the right conditions and it unfolds. Like a flower, it opens when it's ready, not when you yell at it. The deep wisdom of non-striving is that it teaches you how to be in harmony with reality, not in opposition to it. You stop being a soldier against life and become a participant in it. You begin to flow, not float. You're still rooted, still engaged, but your energy is no longer clenched. It's open. This changes how you respond to obstacles. In striving, setbacks feel like failure. In non-striving, they become part of the dance. You meet them without panic, without self-blame. You adjust, you listen, you respond with clarity, not because you're numb, but because you're no longer resisting what's real. There's a soft discipline in this, a kind of elegant strength. You stay consistent, not because you're grinding, but because you're connected to your purpose. You keep going, not out of fear, but out of care. You've stopped trying to bulldoze your way through life. You're learning to walk with it. Non-striving also deepens your spiritual practice. Prayer, meditation, reflection, they become quieter, deeper. You're not trying to achieve enlightenment like a prize. You're simply opening to what already is. The noise fades. You begin to notice things you never saw before. Small moments, gentle truths, the softness underneath everything. And perhaps the most beautiful part, non-striving brings rest. Real rest. The kind that isn't just physical, but mental and emotional. You stop carrying the weight of, "I should be further along." You stop the inner war. You begin to trust the pace of your own unfolding. This trust becomes your anchor. It tells you, you are not late, you are not behind, you are here, and here is enough. So let the striving go, just for now. Let the pressure melt. Let the breath return to its natural rhythm. There is nowhere else to be. There is nothing to prove. What you do matters, but who you are right now matters even more. You don't need to push to be worthy. You don't need to exhaust yourself to be enough. You are allowed to move with ease, to act without panic, to care without clinging. Let effort become a joy again. Let doing be an offering, not a performance. Let this night be the moment you stop driving yourself to the edge and start coming home to peace within action. Here, in this stillness, the world keeps turning. The work gets done. The growth continues. And you get to breathe again. This is the wisdom of non-striving. Let it settle in your bones. Let it carry you into rest. Let the doing come from stillness, not struggle. You've done enough. Now rest. Let your heart stay open. Let your body soften. Let the silence hold you. Everything is already in motion. You don't need to push. You just need to be. So the breath softens. The tension releases. You no longer chase each task like it's your last chance to prove something. You've touched the space where doing flows without pushing, where effort no longer demands a prize. But there's still something subtle beneath the surface, something deeper that keeps showing up. It hides in goals, in plans, in the future you hold so tightly. It's the belief that things must stay exactly as they are, or turn out exactly as you wish. That's where the illusion begins. Even when we loosen our grip on outcomes and stop striving so forcefully, we're often still caught in the invisible web of permanence. The feeling that once something good is found, it should stay, that success must last, love must not change, identity must stay intact. This clinging to what seems solid becomes the root of quiet suffering. We act like life is fixed, but life is movement. Buddhism names this truth clearly, anicca, impermanence, not as an abstract concept, but as the very fabric of reality. Everything changes. Not some things, not just the big things. Everything. That includes your ideas, your relationships, your moods, your victories, your struggles, your roles, your goals. And yet, so often, we live as if permanence were real. We make plans with the assumption that they will unfold as expected. We set goals with the belief that reaching them will lock in happiness. We get attached to specific visions of the future, not because they are right, but because they feel safe, predictable. But that safety is fragile, because the world doesn't follow our script. It never has. The pain doesn't come from the changes, it comes from our refusal to accept that change is natural. When a relationship shifts, when a dream dissolves, when a role ends, the sorrow deepens when we treat that shift as a mistake instead of a movement. We believe something went wrong, when in fact it may be that everything is unfolding exactly as it must. Letting go of permanence doesn't mean giving up hope. It doesn't mean detaching from life or becoming cold. It means softening the belief that anything, including your goals, can stay frozen in time. It means learning to hold your visions like water in your hands, fully, gratefully, but without the illusion that you can stop the flow. This truth also touches how we define ourselves. You're not who you were 10 years ago. You're not even who you were last week. And you won't be who you are today, 5 years from now. Yet, we build identities like fortresses. I'm this kind of person. I want these things. I always do it this way. But identity, too, is part of the illusion. When it becomes rigid, it becomes a trap. Holding on to goals too tightly is often about protecting identity. We believe that reaching a certain milestone will confirm something about us, that we're good enough, successful enough, lovable. So we chase those goals like lifelines, but when goals are built on fear of what we'd be without them, they become prisons dressed as progress. Anicca invites you to move differently. To plan, yes. To dream, absolutely. But to remember that everything is subject to change. And that's not a flaw in the system. It is the system. It's what allows growth, adaptation, evolution. If nothing changed, healing would be impossible. Learning would be impossible. Joy itself would turn stale. Understanding impermanence also helps dissolve regret, because if everything changes, then even the moments you label as mistakes were simply steps along a path that's still unfolding. They weren't final, they weren't fixed, and they never will be. This frees you to stop carrying the weight of trying to rewrite the past. It's already moving. You don't need to drag it with you. There is also relief in knowing that no moment, no emotion, no failure, no success will last forever. The pressure begins to lift. You don't have to panic when joy arises, trying to hold it tight. You don't have to crumble when sadness appears, fearing it will stay forever. Everything you experience is temporary. Joy flows in, pain flows out, and neither one defines who you are. This understanding helps us release perfectionism. Often we set goals with an unconscious hope. Once I get there, everything will stay perfect. But nothing stays. Even the best achievements shift and dissolve, so perfection is not only unreachable, it's unsustainable. Peace doesn't come from locking life in place. It comes from trusting its rhythm. Living with the awareness of anicca doesn't make you passive. In fact, it makes you more alive. Because you know things won't last, you start paying attention. You listen more deeply. You love more fully. You stop delaying your presence. You recognize that this moment is all that's real, and that makes it precious. It also changes how you handle disappointment. When goals don't go as planned, instead of spiraling into despair, you remember, this too is impermanent. The failure, the delay, the heartbreak, it's not the end. It's just a turning, a redirection, and with time, it too will pass. You learn to meet change not with resistance but with openness. You stop seeing life as a straight line. Instead, you start sensing its waves, its turning points, its unpredictable curves. You stop needing every chapter to look the way you pictured it. You start finding beauty in what you didn't expect, because your peace no longer depends on getting what you planned. It rests in your ability to adapt with grace. This is what makes anicca such a powerful lens for goal setting. It invites you to stay flexible, to know what matters to you, but to release the story of how it must arrive. Maybe the goal changes shape. Maybe it evolves. Maybe it disappears altogether and something better rises in its place. If you're clinging, you miss that. But if you're awake, you catch the new opening. This also builds resilience, because permanence is a fragile foundation. When things change, as they always will, a person who clings to fixed plans will break. But one who sees change as part of the path will bend, adjust, continue. This is not weakness, it's wisdom in motion. With this view, failure starts to mean something else. Not proof that you did something wrong, but evidence that something else wants to emerge. You learn to listen to life instead of just pushing your version of it. You become a partner with change, not a victim of it. And that relationship makes everything lighter. Goals themselves become less about proving and more about participating. You're no longer saying, this must happen or I'm not okay. You're saying, this feels aligned right now and I'm open to where it leads. That openness allows your goals to grow with you, to shift as you do. It's important to recognize that impermanence doesn't erase meaning, it deepens it. A flower that only blooms for a week is not less beautiful. It's more so because its life is brief. A moment of laughter, a burst of clarity, a fleeting connection. These are not diminished by their shortness. They are made sacred by it. So too with your own journey. The fact that this phase will end, this body will change, this chapter will close. It's not cause for fear. It's reason to be fully here, to let go of future fantasies and drop into the only thing that's real. Now. This presence becomes your anchor. You're no longer pulled by what might be or trapped in what was. You're rooted in what is. From here, you can move, you can dream, you can act, not because you're trying to freeze life, but because you're participating in its flow. And what happens when you start living this way? Goals become more fluid. Success stops being a fixed destination. It becomes a state of alignment, moment to moment. You start asking different questions, not just what do I want to achieve, but what wants to come through me now, not how can I make things last, but how can I meet this moment fully, knowing it won't stay. This shift brings humility. You stop pretending you control the timeline. You stop demanding guarantees. And from that surrender, a deeper kind of power arises. The power to stay centered even when everything around you changes. Because now you know the truth. Change doesn't mean loss. It means motion. It means life. It means you're not stuck. And neither is the world. So rest now, knowing that even the tightest knots can loosen. Even the hardest days will pass. Even the heaviest stories can be rewritten. Let your breath move without needing to hold it. Let your thoughts rise and fall without needing to control them. Let your goals be like seeds, planted with care, nurtured with love, and released to grow in their own way. Anicca isn't a punishment. It's the invitation to live fully, not someday, now. And now is more than enough. The more clearly we see that everything changes, the more gently we begin to move through the world. We stop gripping at moments, goals, identities. We begin to respond, not react. And still, a new question arises in the silence that follows. How do we act with care when everything shifts? How do we live without swinging between extremes? When life pushes us into control, into exhaustion, or the opposite, into withdrawal and avoidance, how do we stay centered? This is where the middle way begins to speak. It's not just a teaching, it's not a vague suggestion to stay balanced. It's a lived understanding that freedom doesn't come from extremes. It comes from the quiet discipline of not losing yourself to either side. The middle way was born not from theory, but from experience. The Buddha himself lived both ends, indulgence and self-denial, and found both to be traps. One numbed him, the other broke him. Neither led to clarity. And so he stepped into the space between. In today's world, the pressure to go to extremes is constant. You are told to push harder, achieve more, prove yourself, fix everything. Or, when that becomes too much, the temptation is to give up, disconnect, avoid, numb out. Control everything or abandon it all. But both paths leave you unsteady. Over-control creates anxiety and resistance. Passivity builds regret and powerlessness. The middle way invites a third option, one of presence, steadiness, and quiet strength. This path begins with awareness. You start noticing when your energy becomes sharp, frantic, tense, the signs of over-control. You also notice when it becomes dull, heavy, resigned, the signs of withdrawal. Instead of judging these states, you recognize them. You become intimate with their patterns. And then you ask the deeper question, what does balance look like here? Balance is not a perfect line. It is a living response to the moment. It's choosing action without panic. It's resting without collapse. It's knowing when to speak and when to be silent, when to persist and when to let go. The middle way teaches that wisdom is not rigid. It adjusts, it learns, it listens. One of the signs of imbalance is tension in the body. Over-control tightens your chest, narrows your breath, locks your shoulders. You try to hold the world up on your own, but life is not asking you to carry everything. It's asking you to meet it, not dominate it. The middle way invites softness where there is strain. You keep doing what matters, but without gripping it so hard. At the same time, passivity has its own signals. You feel numb, unmotivated, disconnected. The mind becomes foggy. You stop showing up for your life. You wait for change, but you don't participate in it. The middle way doesn't confuse surrender with inaction. It knows that letting go and giving up are not the same. One is rooted in trust, the other in fear. The practice is to stay present, even when things feel uncertain or slow. This teaching is especially powerful when applied to decision-making. Often we freeze, not because the choices are unclear, but because we're afraid of making the wrong move. The over-controlling mind demands certainty. The passive mind avoids commitment. The middle way says, act with care, but release the need to know everything. Take the next right step, and trust that clarity deepens through movement. It also touches how we relate to emotions. In over-control, we suppress or micromanage our feelings. We try to stay polished, in charge, unaffected. In passivity, we let our emotions flood us. We collapse under them, letting them define us. The middle way meets emotion with presence. It doesn't push it away or get swept up by it. It holds space for it, allows it, learns from it, and then continues forward. This balance extends to relationships. Trying to control others, their thoughts, reactions, behaviors, only breeds tension. But disappearing emotionally, withholding or avoiding connection, doesn't create peace either. The middle way offers honesty without aggression, openness without exposure. It allows real connection because it comes from a place of steady self-awareness, not fear or demand. It is also deeply relevant to how we handle failure. When you are over-controlling, failure feels like collapse. You internalize it. You panic. You scramble to fix it. When you're passive, failure becomes a reason to stop trying. You shrink back, give up, hide. The middle way sees failure as a teacher, not something to resist or avoid, but something to meet. You examine what happened. You adjust. You move forward, not defeated, but informed. There's a rhythm in this path that is often missed. It's not static. It flows like a dance. You lean in, you pull back, you listen, you speak, you pause, you move. The wisdom is in the response, not in applying the same intensity to every situation. The middle way doesn't offer a formula. It asks for attention, honesty, and self-trust. This also affects how you pursue growth. Over-control turns self-improvement into punishment. You become obsessed with fixing yourself. You never feel enough, but giving up on growth isn't freedom either. It's stagnation. The middle way says, grow because you care, not because you are broken. Evolve out of love, not self-rejection. It's not about perfection. It's about deepening alignment with your true nature. The same principle applies to spiritual practice. Some people overexert, trying to force enlightenment, pushing themselves with intensity. Others drift, waiting for wisdom to arrive without effort. The middle way is patient and persistent. It shows up daily, not with pressure, but with presence. It knows that transformation takes time and that rushing only delays it. In daily life, this path can be as simple as knowing when to rest. When you're caught in overdoing, your body sends signals: fatigue, irritation, disconnection. Instead of ignoring these, you listen. You rest not because you're weak, but because you're wise enough to notice the signs. And then, when the energy returns, you act again, not from pressure, but from clarity. One of the quiet gifts of this teaching is that it teaches you to trust yourself again. When you swing between extremes, you often lose faith in your own decisions. But as you learn to walk the middle way, you rebuild that trust. You realize you don't need to be perfect to be steady. You just need to stay honest, flexible, awake. This path also brings ease into productivity. Over-control turns work into a battlefield. Every task becomes a test. Passivity, on the other hand, turns purpose into avoidance. You do less, but it doesn't feel restful. It feels dull. The middle way allows you to work with care and rest without guilt. It restores your natural rhythm. You begin to know when to push and when to pause, and both feel aligned. In creativity, the same wisdom applies. Forcing inspiration kills it. Avoiding creation stalls it. The middle way invites discipline without rigidity. You show up to the work, but you stay open. You shape your ideas, but you don't strangle them. You let creativity breathe, and it becomes more alive. This principle helps with boundaries too. Over-controlling people often build walls. They say yes when they mean no, then explode from resentment. Passive people lose themselves in others. They fear conflict and avoid honesty. The middle way speaks clearly and kindly. It knows your needs matter. It also honors the humanity in others. It protects without punishing. It connects without collapsing. There is also a physical intelligence in this teaching. When the body is in balance, breath flows, muscles release, the nervous system calms. You no longer live in fight or flight or freeze. You settle into regulation. From here, your actions become clearer. Your intuition sharpens. You don't waste energy on survival. You use it for presence. And then there's the way this path shapes your sense of control. Life won't always match your plans. Sometimes things fall apart. But when you live the middle way, you learn how to meet those moments without swinging to despair or delusion. You stay centered, not because you know what will happen, but because you trust your capacity to move through it. This is the quiet power of balance. It doesn't shout, it doesn't prove, it doesn't dominate. It listens, it responds, it adjusts. It keeps showing up even when things feel messy, and in doing so, it becomes unshakable. So now, take this in. The world will keep trying to pull you off center, into chaos or into numbness. But this path is always available, right here, in the next breath, the next choice, the next gentle return to what is steady and whole within you. You don't need to control it all. You don't need to disappear. You just need to stay. Stay in this moment. Stay in this body. Stay in this truth. Balance lives here, in the space between extremes. And now that you've found it, you don't need to force your way forward. You just need to take the next honest step. So the path grows quieter. The swings between too much and too little begin to fade. The extremes lose their grip. There's more space between each breath, more awareness in each step. You no longer rush to fix or disappear. You stay present. You choose action without aggression, stillness without collapse. But beneath that peace, another old belief waits in the background, one that quietly drives control, fear, and frustration. It's the belief that if you do good, good must happen, that if you give your best, life owes you something, that right effort guarantees right results. This is where karma often gets misunderstood, and this misunderstanding builds invisible pressure. You start to measure your value by outcomes. You think in terms of exchange. I give this, I must get that. But this is not the heart of karma, not as the Buddha taught it. Karma is not a vending machine. It's not cosmic justice in the way many people think. It doesn't mean every good deed earns a reward or every misstep brings punishment. Karma is more subtle, more honest. It means action. It means cause. It means that everything you do, every word, thought, and intention plants a seed. But you don't get to control exactly when or how that seed will grow. And you don't act to get something. You act because it aligns with truth. This distinction changes everything. It releases you from the exhausting attempt to manage outcomes. You stop treating your life like a system of reward and punishment. You start asking better questions. Not, what will I get from this? But, what am I creating in myself by doing this? That shift is freedom, because now your power lives in the present moment, not in chasing a future result. When karma is misunderstood, it becomes a source of shame and confusion. People blame themselves for every painful experience. They think, I must have done something wrong. I must have failed. But life is more complex than that. Not everything that happens to you is a direct result of your current actions. Karma is collective. It moves across time, space, systems, and patterns. It's not a punishment. It's simply cause and effect playing out across layers far beyond what the mind can trace. This means that suffering isn't always your fault, and success isn't always your doing alone. There are infinite conditions that shape every outcome. Karma reminds us that what we do matters, but it also humbles us by reminding us that we are not in control of everything that follows. This is not a weakness, it's clarity. The true power of karma lies in intention. It asks not just what you're doing, but why. Are you acting from fear, pride, resentment, or from kindness, clarity, care? Two people can do the same thing with different intentions and create very different karmic patterns. It's not about performance, it's about alignment. You become what you practice, and the quality of your intention shapes the energy you carry forward. This awareness makes you more honest. When you understand that karma doesn't guarantee results, you stop manipulating your behavior to earn a reward. You become sincere. You act rightly because it feels true, not because you're keeping score. This gives your choices a deeper integrity. There's no performance, no transaction, just the quiet dignity of right action. This clarity also brings compassion. If someone is struggling, you stop thinking they deserve it. If someone succeeds, you stop assuming they earned it all alone. You see beyond the surface. You understand that every life is shaped by visible and invisible forces. This humbles judgment. It opens empathy. It builds patience with others and with yourself. Right action, as taught in the Noble Eightfold Path, isn't about outcome. It's about living in harmony with the present moment, with others, with your own heart. It means speaking honestly, acting with care, respecting life, and being responsible for the ripple you create, even when no one is watching, even when results don't follow the way you hoped. You begin to live with more focus on process. You pay attention to how you do things, not just what they lead to. This builds consistency. It roots your life in values, not in mood swings or external results. You show up the same whether or not anyone claps, because your peace no longer depends on applause. Letting go of the need to control the fruit of your action also eases disappointment. Not because you no longer care, but because your sense of purpose isn't tied to how things look on the outside. You may pour your energy into something and it might still fall apart. But instead of collapsing, you reflect, you grow, you plant new seeds, because you're not living for guarantees, you're living from principle. This practice becomes especially powerful when things feel unfair, when someone lies and gets rewarded, when you work hard and still fall short. The mind wants to tighten, to demand balance, but karma invites trust in a larger unfolding, not a fantasy that everything will be fixed, but a deep faith that right action builds inner strength, even when outer results don't match. You stop using effort as a weapon. You stop tying your worth to recognition. You begin to take joy in being aligned. You do what's needed, and you release the rest. This does not mean being passive. It means being wise. Wise enough to know the limits of your control and the power of your intention. Even in small actions, this shows. A kind word, a patient silence, a generous pause. These aren't just gestures, they are seeds. And though you may not see the bloom, something always grows. Maybe in someone else, maybe in you, maybe in ways you'll never understand, but nothing true is wasted. This truth also heals perfectionism. You stop obsessing over getting it all right. You focus instead on staying honest. You know that mistakes will happen, but you learn from them. You don't need to punish yourself. You take responsibility without shame. You keep planting better seeds. You keep moving forward. The misunderstanding of karma often makes people fearful, afraid to make the wrong move. But real karma is not about fear. It's about connection. It reminds you that your life touches other lives, that your energy echoes beyond this moment. It asks you to live with care, not anxiety. This kind of living builds resilience. Because when your peace is rooted in intention, you're no longer shaken by every external change. You may be disappointed, you may grieve, But you don't break. You trust the ground beneath you, not because it guarantees success, but because it is steady, real, earned. You also stop comparing yourself. When you no longer see life as a scoreboard, you stop needing to win. You stop measuring your path against others. You start listening more closely to what your own right action looks like, which may not look impressive, but feels deeply true. Karma also teaches patience. It reminds you that some seeds take time, that not everything blooms quickly, that effort accumulates in quiet, invisible ways. You stop needing instant proof that what you're doing is working. You trust the process. You water the ground even when it's dry. And eventually, something grows. Maybe not what you expected, but often what you truly needed. This frees you from bitterness. You stop blaming life for not meeting your timeline. You start engaging with it as it is, not as you think it should be. You stop saying, "I deserve this by now," and you start saying, "This is where I am. What can I do with care?" This doesn't mean accepting harm. Karma also means being responsible for what you allow. Right action includes boundaries, includes speaking up, includes refusing to perpetuate pain. It doesn't mean shrinking. It means showing up in a way that aligns with your deepest truth, even when it's hard. And it means letting go when needed. If a path becomes harmful, you don't stay because of sunk cost. You don't cling because of guilt. You trust that walking away can also be right action. That sometimes not continuing is the most powerful seed you can plant. This understanding is quiet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't need proof, but it changes how you live. You become someone who acts with integrity, not for applause, who rests without shame, who contributes without needing control, who serves not out of fear, but out of love. So now, return to this breath. You are not behind, you are not owed, and you are not empty. Every small choice matters. Every intention leaves a trace. The future is shaped not by force, but by presence. And you, right now, are shaping it. Not with pressure, not with fear, but with care, and that is more than enough. There's a shift that happens when you stop measuring yourself by results, when you stop performing goodness to earn something back, when karma becomes less about external gain and more about inner truth. But even as you begin to act from alignment instead of outcome, something deeper may still be running the show. A quiet voice in the background that says, "I need to be someone. I need to matter. I need proof that I am enough." This voice doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes it hides behind ambition, service, even spiritual goals. But its weight is felt, the pressure to achieve, to be seen, to be defined. This pressure is rooted in identity, and identity, from a Buddhist view, is a construction, temporary, changing, not solid. The deeper teaching that cuts through this illusion is sunyata, often translated as emptiness. Not emptiness as in lack, not despair, but emptiness as in spaciousness, as in the absence of fixed, separate, independent existence. And it is this understanding that begins to free us from ego-driven desires that quietly distort our lives. To see sunyata clearly is to realize that nothing exists in isolation. No thought, no object, no person stands alone. Everything depends on causes and conditions. Everything arises in relationship. This includes your goals, your identity, your sense of self. When you deeply understand this, the grip begins to loosen. Ego doesn't like that. It wants to be central, important, permanent. It wants certainty and structure. It says, "This is who I am," and then builds a life to prove it. But that I is not stable, it's not fixed, it's a flowing process, a web of memories, habits, preferences, emotions. When you believe it's solid, you cling, you chase things, not because they're right, but because they reinforce the story of who you think you need to be. Sunyata reveals that this story is not truth, it's a lens. And while it helps you function, it also limits you. When you identify too strongly with it, your life becomes a series of confirmations. You're no longer present. You're busy maintaining a character. And when that character is challenged, you feel fear, anger, shame, because you've mistaken the mask for the face beneath it. The idea of success is one of the most common ego projects. People pursue it relentlessly, not always because the work itself is meaningful, but because they believe success will prove something about who they are, that it will make them whole, lovable, safe. But from a Sunyata perspective, success is empty, not worthless, but lacking fixed identity. It is what it is only in relationship to the mind that names it. You begin to see that success means different things depending on context, culture, conditioning. It is not a universal truth, it's a shifting symbol, and when you grasp this, your chase begins to slow. You stop running after meaning in external forms. You start looking into the space within, the place that doesn't need to be anyone to feel at peace. This doesn't mean you stop living. You still show up, still create, still connect. But your actions are no longer about self-definition. They're about participation, presence, expression. You stop using the world to reinforce a fragile self. You start dissolving that self into the experience itself. This dissolution is not destruction. It's liberation. You don't lose yourself. You stop pretending to be something separate from the whole. And with that, a new kind of energy is born, one that doesn't grasp, one that doesn't perform, one that simply moves where life asks it to. Sunyata also reshapes your relationship to desire. Desire is not inherently the problem, but when it's driven by ego, by the need to fix, complete, or elevate the self, it becomes endless, because the self it's trying to secure doesn't actually exist. So the chase continues. You get what you want, and the satisfaction fades. The hunger returns, not because you're greedy, but because the object was never the answer. Understanding emptiness allows you to see that what you're often craving isn't the goal itself. It's the feeling you believe it will bring. Safety, worth, belonging. But those feelings don't live in external things. They arise from presence, from insight, from letting go. Sunyata doesn't tell you not to want. It invites you to see through your wanting, to trace it to its root and question its origin. This clarity softens compulsions. You stop needing things to fill the silence. You stop rushing into decisions just to escape emptiness, because now you see that emptiness is not a problem. It's the space from which freedom begins. It holds everything without clinging to anything. This doesn't mean you float above life. It means you enter it more fully, with fewer demands. You speak honestly, not to prove something. You love freely, not to possess. You move through joy and sorrow without building a fixed identity around either one. You begin to trust that life does not need to be controlled in order to be meaningful. Sunyata also cuts through comparison. Ego thrives on measuring, better, worse, ahead, behind. It seeks comfort in being special, important, validated. But emptiness reveals that no identity is more real than another. That what you see in others is just as fluid, just as constructed. This doesn't lead to detachment. It leads to humility. You no longer need to stand out. You just need to show up. From here, compassion grows, because if the self is empty, then so is the boundary between you and others. Their suffering is not separate. Their joy is not foreign. You act not from obligation or virtue, but from the simple knowing that we rise and fall together. The ego asks, "What do I get from this?" Emptiness asks, "What does this moment need?" This changes how you hold mistakes. Instead of defending the ego, you become curious. There's less shame, more honesty. You stop needing to be right all the time. You stop needing to protect a perfect image. You see the error, you learn, you adjust, without making it personal. Because there's no fixed self to shame, only patterns to observe and refine. Even in spiritual practice, sunyata is essential. Without it, the path becomes another identity, another version of me to protect. You wear the robes, speak the words, perform the piece. But emptiness invites you to drop the roles, to stop being a spiritual person and simply be. The practice becomes less about becoming and more about unbecoming. This leads to greater stillness. Not the forced stillness of holding everything together, but the natural stillness that comes when nothing needs to be defended. You rest not because you've earned it, but because there's no one left to exhaust. The striving mind dissolves, and what remains is presence, open, alert, free. Sunyata also dissolves attachment to roles. Whether it's your job, family position, social identity, you stop seeing them as definitions. They become functions, not prisons. You still play your part, but you don't confuse the part for the person. You can shift, change, evolve without fearing the loss of who you thought you were. And this makes you more adaptable. When things fall apart, you don't collapse. When plans change, you don't panic. You've stopped building your security on fixed forms. You trust the space itself. You've let go of needing to be solid, and in that softness, you've found real strength. Sunyata is not a rejection of the world. It's the doorway to entering it more fully. Without the need to possess, to cling, to control, it reveals that everything you thought was fixed is actually moving. And that's not chaos, that's life unfolding. So now, pause. Notice the space around your thoughts, the space between your breaths, the silence beneath your stories. That space is not empty in a painful way. It's full of possibility. It's the freedom to stop performing and to start living without the weight of becoming. You don't have to be someone special to matter. You don't have to achieve more to be worthy. You don't have to chase peace through identity. Let the self dissolve. Let the need to be defined fall away. What's left is enough. What's left is real. When the structure of ego starts to fall away, When Sunyata reveals that there's no fixed self to defend, a strange kind of peace begins to settle. There's less urgency, less pretending, more space to breathe. But even as emptiness softens the mind, one of the strongest threads still holds tight: the belief in who we think we are, not just as a concept, but as an identity built over years of proving, fixing, performing, and surviving. And this identity, when clung to, quietly becomes the source of our most painful patterns, especially the need to force outcomes. It's subtle. It starts early. We get messages about who we're supposed to be. Maybe someone called us smart or strong or the responsible one. Maybe we were told we had to be a success, a leader, a provider, or someone who always keeps it together. And over time, those words sink in. They become self-definitions. We begin to live not from presence, but from a script. And every action becomes an attempt to protect that role. For example, if you believe you are the one who must always fix things, then letting something unfold naturally feels unsafe. The moment a problem arises, you jump in, not because the situation needs control, but because your identity feels threatened. Who are you if you don't fix it? If you've built your worth around being competent, calm, or always needed, then any moment that challenges that will feel unbearable. This is how forcing is born. Not always from greed or control, but from fear of identity loss. If you've spent your life believing you are only valuable when successful, then failure won't just feel disappointing. It will feel like death to the self you've built. So you overwork, overthink, overplan, not because you're clear, but because you're scared to lose the version of yourself that gives you a sense of place in the world. Identity isn't just who you think you are, it's who you believe others expect you to be. You start living for appearances, afraid of disappointing images you never fully chose. And in doing so, you stop being real. You filter your truth. You ignore your needs. You say yes when you mean no. You keep pushing even when your body says stop, all because stopping feels like failure, not of the task, but of the self. Letting go of identity is one of the most terrifying but liberating things a person can do. It means facing the reality that who you think you are is not solid. It means asking, what if I'm not the achiever? What if I'm not the helper? What if I don't have to be the strong one all the time? And that's hard, because identity brings a sense of safety. Even if it's exhausting, at least it feels familiar. But the truth is, holding on to it is what keeps you in a loop of tension and force. When you let identity soften, your actions begin to change. You stop needing to push so hard. You listen more. You pause before reacting. You ask, is this coming from truth or from a need to prove something? That simple pause is where freedom begins. You start moving from clarity, not compulsion. This shift is especially important when it comes to goals. Goals are not the problem. But when your self-worth is wrapped up in achieving them, you lose your ability to respond with wisdom. Every delay becomes a threat. Every setback feels personal. You push harder, not because the goal matters, but because your sense of self depends on it. And when it doesn't work out, the collapse is deep. Not just disappointment, but identity rupture. Letting go of identity doesn't mean you stop having preferences or direction. It means you become more honest about where your energy is coming from. You start to act without performance. You serve without needing to be seen. You care without turning it into a project about yourself. There's more space for life to move through you. This also reshapes how you handle feedback. If you're identified with being the smart one, criticism becomes unbearable. But if you see yourself as a fluid being, always learning, always changing, then feedback is just information. It doesn't touch your core, because that core is no longer a frozen concept. It's a living, breathing presence. Relationships shift too. When you stop clinging to roles like the caretaker, the provider, or the one who has it all together, you become more real. You let others in. You allow yourself to receive. You say, "I don't know," without shame. You show your limits without collapse. And that openness creates deeper connection, not based on performance, but on truth. There is a deep exhaustion that comes from living inside an identity, from constantly trying to maintain the image of who you believe you should be. When that drops, there's a kind of rest that isn't just physical, it's emotional, mental, even spiritual. It's the rest of not needing to be anyone in particular. And it doesn't make you lazy, it makes you more responsive. You become a better listener to others, yes, but also to yourself. You stop overriding your intuition just to maintain appearances. You start trusting the moment instead of clinging to the script. This trust allows for more adaptability. If you're not trapped in identity, you can pivot. You can let something fail without it meaning you're a failure. You can walk away from what no longer fits. You stop squeezing yourself into roles that used to serve you but no longer do. You give yourself permission to evolve, and that permission is powerful. It means you don't need to wait until everything falls apart to change. You can shift before the burnout. You can slow down before the collapse, because your choices aren't tied to ego anymore. They're tied to reality. There is humility in letting go of identity. You admit you don't have it all figured out. You stop pretending you're above help. You allow yourself to be a work in progress, and this makes you more compassionate. Because you realize everyone else is navigating the same fear, the same attachment, the same masks. From this place, you no longer try to fix people to maintain your identity as the helper. You stop trying to impress people to keep your role as the successful one. You stop shrinking to protect your image as the humble one. You begin to act not from image, but from inner alignment. This is a quiet kind of freedom. No one may notice it on the surface, but inside something softens. The grip loosens. You breathe deeper. You respond more slowly. You begin to feel what it's like to live from presence, not persona. You realize that you can still show up fully, still care deeply, still work passionately, without making it about your reflection in the eyes of others. And this takes away the pressure. You stop needing to control outcomes because those outcomes no longer define you. Whether it works or doesn't, whether they approve or not, it's no longer about who you are. It's just life, unfolding. And in that unfolding, you return to a deeper kind of confidence, not the kind built on labels or applause, but the kind that says, "I trust the one behind the mask, even if no one sees it, even if I'm still learning." That trust is what allows you to move without forcing, to lead without domination, to love without control. Let go of the names you've been given. Let go of the roles you've been stuck in. Let go of the tight definitions that tell you who you must be. You are not just a success. You are not just a helper. You are not just the strong one. You are not your past. You are not your image. You are the one underneath all that. The one watching. The one breathing. The one that doesn't need to be anything in particular to be at peace. Return to that again and again, not to disappear, but to live with less effort, less tension, less fear. Because in that space, there's nothing left to force. There's just the next clear step and the freedom to take it. When the need to be someone begins to fade, when the grip around your identity starts to loosen, a rare kind of peace begins to emerge. You stop performing for validation. You stop chasing roles that no longer fit. You move from a deeper place, one that doesn't rely on proving your worth through action. But even in this inner freedom, the mind still wants to fill the space. It rushes to speak, to solve, to explain. It fills silence with noise, both outside and within. And so the next step becomes clear. Not more doing, not more striving, but something far more powerful: stillness. Noble silence is not just the absence of talking. It is the conscious choice to stop interfering, to stop reacting to every thought, every impulse, every uncomfortable moment. It is the space where ego softens even further, not through effort, but through restraint. It doesn't mean withdrawal. It doesn't mean disengagement. It means listening more deeply. It means creating room for life to unfold on its own terms, without your constant shaping of it. When you live in constant noise, verbal, emotional, mental, there's no room to hear what's underneath. Reactions become automatic. Patterns repeat. Conversations go in circles. But noble silence interrupts this cycle. It's not silence for the sake of quiet. It's silence that holds presence. Silence that says, I don't need to fix this right now. I don't need to rush to clarity. I can sit in the unknown. This kind of silence reveals truth. When you don't speak just to avoid discomfort, you begin to notice what discomfort is trying to teach you. When you don't speak just to control a situation, you begin to witness how it naturally moves without your interference. You start to understand that not every space needs to be filled, that sometimes clarity only comes when you stop trying to force it into words. Mental silence is just as vital. The inner dialogue that constantly narrates your life can become its own prison. The voice that explains, judges, compares, plans. It runs non-stop unless you choose to pause. Noble silence invites you to watch this voice without feeding it, to observe thoughts without following them, to create a gap between awareness and reaction. That gap is where peace begins. This practice becomes especially important in conflict. The urge to speak, defend, correct, or win is strong, but often words made in reaction only create more distance. Noble silence doesn't mean shutting down. It means waiting for the right moment. It means holding space until your response comes from wisdom, not reactivity. It means allowing the other person's words to land before forming your own. In relationships, this silence is transformative. When you stop interrupting, fixing, or filling the space, you begin to hear people differently. You listen without planning your reply. You notice what's underneath their words, and this kind of listening creates safety. It tells the other person, you are allowed to be heard without pressure. It builds trust not through answers, but through presence. Noble silence is also a practice of humility. It teaches you that your words are not always needed, that your opinion doesn't always have to be shared, that your insights can wait. This isn't about self-erasure, it's about discernment, knowing when speaking serves the moment and when silence says more. Even in solitude, noble silence has power. It becomes a mirror. Without distraction, you face your thoughts. You notice the patterns. You see the emotions you usually outrun. And in that seeing, something shifts. You realize that presence doesn't need noise, that being alive doesn't require constant activity, that stillness is not the absence of life, it is the heart of it. This kind of silence is not passive, it's deeply engaged. It requires discipline. The discipline to wait, to watch, to withhold impulsive reactions. The discipline to choose not to interrupt your own unfolding. It's not always comfortable. In fact, it can be confronting, but it creates space where real transformation can happen. You begin to see how often your words are used to protect the ego, to gain control, to avoid vulnerability. You start to notice the difference between speech that brings clarity and speech that just fills air. And slowly, you begin to speak less, but with more care. Your words become precise, thoughtful, grounded. They carry weight because they are not driven by fear. Noble silence also helps you face uncertainty. When the mind is quiet, you're not rushing to conclusions. You're not constructing stories to avoid the unknown. You're letting things emerge in their own time. And this builds trust, not in your ability to figure everything out, but in your ability to remain still until the next step reveals itself. In this way, silence becomes a form of surrender, not the surrender of giving up, but the surrender of not needing to control every outcome. You still act, you still respond, but not from panic, not from ego, from presence, from awareness, from the calm center that sees clearly and moves wisely. In creative work, noble silence makes room for inspiration. When the noise quiets, insight rises. Ideas come not from force, but from spaciousness. You stop chasing solutions. You start receiving them. This doesn't mean doing nothing. It means creating space for the right thing to come forward, rather than trying to squeeze it into shape. Noble silence also strengthens intuition. The more you quiet the mind, the more you hear the subtle signals, the feeling in your body, the quiet sense of yes or no. You learn to trust this deeper knowing, not because it's dramatic or loud, but because it comes from stillness, not from fear. This kind of silence is especially healing in a world of constant noise, information, opinions, updates. It never stops. But silence gives your nervous system a chance to reset. It lowers stress. It deepens focus. It reminds your body that it doesn't have to be on high alert all the time. And in meditation, noble silence is the foundation. Not just silence in your mouth, but silence in your effort. You stop trying to reach a certain state. You stop judging your experience. You simply sit. You breathe, you watch, and over time, that simple practice changes how you live. You become less reactive, less tangled, more steady. This silence is not something you achieve, it's something you return to, again and again. In the car, in a pause before a response, in a walk without headphones, in a moment of feeling and not naming. It's always available, but you must choose it. Choosing silence doesn't mean disappearing. It means becoming more present, more honest, more receptive. You don't need to narrate every moment. You don't need to fill every gap. You don't need to explain your worth. You are allowed to rest in quiet. You are allowed to wait and watch. And sometimes, silence is the most powerful answer. Not because it avoids truth, but because it respects it. Some truths can't be spoken. Some healing happens in the space between words. Some peace arrives only when the noise stops. Let that peace come. Let the silence hold you. Let it speak for you when words would only add confusion. Noble silence is not emptiness. It's presence without interference. And it is from this space that life begins to unfold, not as you plan, but as it must. And that unfolding, without force, is more than enough. When silence settles, a different kind of clarity begins to grow. No longer drowned out by mental noise or pressured speech, you begin to see your inner life with sharper detail. Not just thoughts and emotions, but the movements beneath them, the motivations, the pulls, the urges that guide your choices without always being seen. One of the strongest forces among them is desire. It shows up in almost everything you do, but not all desire is equal. Some kinds bring peace, others tighten the mind, some lead to growth, others to suffering. To walk this path with honesty, you must learn to tell the difference. In Buddhist teaching, this difference is described through two words, chanda and tanha. Both are forms of wanting. Both involve energy, direction, intention. But their roots and their results are completely different. Chanda is wise desire. It is the motivation to move towards something wholesome, beneficial, aligned with truth. It's the inner pull that says, this matters, this supports life, this feels right. It's not born from fear or lack. It doesn't demand certainty. It carries clarity and lightness. You feel more present when you follow it, not more anxious. Tanha is craving. It's the restless hunger to get something that you believe will finally make you complete. It's not about the object. It's about escaping the discomfort you feel right now. It's driven by grasping, pressure, and dissatisfaction. Even when it gets what it wants, it doesn't rest. It moves to the next object, and then the next, and it always whispers the same lie. Once you have this, you'll be okay. Learning to recognize the difference between these two is not just helpful, it's essential. Because craving often disguises itself as purpose. It can wear the mask of ambition, romance, self-improvement, even spirituality. But beneath the surface, it's still fueled by lack. You chase not because you are clear, but because you are afraid to stop. Wise desire does not carry that urgency. It doesn't grab, it guides. It arises from a place that feels already whole, already steady. It doesn't promise that life will be perfect if you get what you want. It simply invites you to participate in something meaningful. There's room to breathe inside chanda. There's space to adjust. You don't cling to results. You care, but you don't collapse if things don't go as planned. Craving, on the other hand, tightens your body. It narrows your vision. It creates tunnel thinking, this or nothing. It pulls you out of the present and into imaginary futures where everything finally feels right. But the more you chase it, the further away peace seems to be. You begin to live for the future while missing what's right in front of you. This distinction becomes especially important in decision-making. When you're choosing your next step, Ask not just what you want, but why you want it. Is it to move closer to truth or to escape discomfort? Is it to express something real or to prove something to others or yourself? Is it an act of alignment or a way to avoid what you're feeling? These questions don't require judgment. They require honesty. Because even the most outwardly noble actions can come from craving if the root is fear. And even the smallest, quietest action can be chanda if it's born from clarity. The work is to look gently, to pause long enough to see what's actually moving you. This difference also affects how you handle disappointment. If your desire was wise, you can accept when things don't work out. You feel the loss, but you're not shattered, because your peace wasn't tied to the outcome. But if the desire was craving, any disruption feels like a threat to your identity, your worth, your safety. You react with blame, shame, or panic, and the cycle repeats. Craving is built on the belief that this moment is not enough, that something out there will finally fix the emptiness inside. But emptiness cannot be filled with more reaching. It dissolves through presence, through letting go, through understanding that the very thing you're chasing is often already here, just blocked by the noise of wanting. Wise desire does not ignore ambition. It includes the wish to grow, to help, to learn, to heal. But it does so without obsession. It allows for failure. It allows for change. It walks the path without crushing you under pressure. It's gentle and steady. It builds patience instead of anxiety. This shows up in relationships too. Craving makes you attach quickly, idealize wildly, fear loss constantly. You try to hold people in place, needing them to complete your story. But wise desire allows connection to breathe. It loves fully without trying to possess. It knows that another person cannot complete you, only meet you. In work and creativity, the same difference applies. Craving needs recognition. It needs proof of worth. It needs to be the best. So it exhausts you. It compares you. It robs joy. But wise desire works from meaning, not ego. You still give your best, but your value is no longer riding on the result. You create because it feels true, not because you're trying to be someone. This is also where discipline becomes clearer. Craving can look like effort, but it's frantic. It pushes from fear. It can't rest. But wise desire brings consistent effort without aggression. You keep going not because you're scared to stop, but because it feels good to stay in motion. Your discipline becomes a form of care, not control. Understanding this difference helps with letting go. Craving holds on too tightly. It won't release what's no longer working because it needs that thing to keep its story alive. But wise desire knows when to release. It can end something without collapse. It sees that timing matters, and forcing something past its natural end only creates suffering. You also begin to understand your past differently. Many choices that once looked like mistakes were simply moments when craving led the way. You don't have to hate those parts of yourself. You can meet them with compassion. You can learn. You can recognize when the voice of craving returns and choose not to follow it. That's wisdom in action. As this understanding deepens, you begin to reshape how you live. You set goals with spaciousness. You move toward what matters without being consumed by it. You rest without guilt. You act without obsession. You enjoy success without needing it to define you. You feel failure without making it mean you're broken. You begin to live in a state of enough. That doesn't mean complacency. It means wholeness. From here, you can still grow, dream, stretch. But you don't abandon yourself in the process. You don't chase peace. You carry it with you. This way of living doesn't mean every moment is easy. There will still be challenges, still be longings, still be moments of tension. But now you know how to see them clearly. You know how to ask, is this Chanda or Tanha? And that question brings you back to center. You start to make peace with desire itself. You stop treating it as the enemy. You stop swinging between suppression and indulgence. You learn to walk with it wisely, to feel its energy and know when it is pointing toward truth and when it is pulling you away. You trust that wise desire doesn't shout. It doesn't rush. It speaks quietly, often through the body, often through stillness. It doesn't offer guarantees, but it offers alignment. And that is worth more than any fleeting reward. Let this understanding stay with you. Let it shape your choices, not through fear, but through care. Let it teach you that you don't need to chase what you already carry. Let it remind you that you are not the hunger. You are the space that sees it clearly. From that space, all things become possible. Without force, without grasping. Just one step, steady and true. When the difference between craving and wise desire becomes clear, you begin to feel the shift in your everyday choices. You're no longer pulled by every shiny possibility. You begin to trust the motivations that come from a place of quiet steadiness. But even with this clarity, the old habit of control still lingers. You might no longer chase goals out of desperation, but a more subtle tension can remain. A desire for things to turn out the way you planned. This fixation on outcome is often disguised. It hides in good intentions. It wears the mask of responsibility, preparation, even love, but its energy is rigid, anxious and unforgiving, and unless you see it, it continues to shape your actions. This is where mindfulness becomes essential, not just mindfulness of breath or body, but mindfulness of outcome fixation. The ability to notice in real time when your mind shifts from presence to pressure, when your attention leaves the process and moves into grasping for results. This habit is rarely loud. It starts as a tightening in the chest, a flicker of impatience, a subtle story that says, "This needs to work." And if you're not watching, it takes over. Outcome fixation does not only appear in moments of failure or doubt, it can show up even when things are going well. The mind jumps ahead. It begins to script what should happen next. It loses trust in the moment. And the problem isn't that you care, it's that you start to attach your peace to a specific version of how life should unfold. That attachment, even when small, starts to distort your presence. Mindfulness helps you interrupt this before it turns into force. It gives you a pause, a breath, a space between feeling and reaction. You begin to notice when your body tenses before a conversation, when your thoughts begin running toward future outcomes instead of staying grounded in action. This kind of awareness is not analytical, it's experiential. You learn to recognize the shift by how it feels, not by thinking about it. For example, when preparing for something important, a conversation, a project, a decision, the energy behind your preparation reveals everything. Are you acting with care, or are you driven by fear of failure? Are you rooted in clarity, or are you overextending because you believe things must go perfectly? Mindfulness of outcome fixation means catching the moment when your care becomes control. This awareness is not about stopping effort. It's about noticing the difference between intention and attachment. You begin to understand that outcome fixation creates pressure that doesn't make you more effective. It makes you more reactive. Your thinking narrows. Your emotional range contracts. You begin to treat everything like a test instead of a path. Bringing attention to this pattern allows a different kind of wisdom to grow. You start recognizing the moments when you're leaning forward too far, when you're already living in the next hour, the next day, the next conversation. Mindfulness doesn't pull you away from your goals. It simply keeps your feet in the present as you move toward them. This presence transforms how you relate to obstacles. When outcome is your focus, setbacks feel like signs that something is broken. The mind spirals, trying to fix, adjust, or give up. But when you are mindful of the pattern, you begin to respond instead of react. You allow the situation to teach you something instead of confirming your fears. This subtle mindfulness also reveals how often you argue with reality. Outcome fixation is rarely about what's happening. It's about what you think should be happening instead. You compare the present to a mental script, and when they don't match, tension arises. You begin to push against the moment, trying to change it instead of understand it. But mindfulness invites a shift, not into passivity, but into cooperation with what is real. You stop assuming that control is the same as care. You stop confusing surrender with indifference. You begin to see that letting go of outcome doesn't mean letting go of responsibility. It means showing up fully without trying to shape what happens next to fit your expectations. This opens the door to a more honest kind of action. You ask, what is needed here, instead of, how do I make this go my way? You become more flexible, more responsive, more capable of adapting when things shift, not because you don't care, but because you're no longer attached to a single version of success. One of the clearest signs of outcome fixation is urgency. When mindfulness is present, urgency becomes a signal, not a command. You feel the pressure, but you don't let it drive you. You pause, you breathe, you examine what's underneath the push. Often you'll find fear of failure, rejection, embarrassment. And just seeing that gives you space. You realize you don't have to obey every inner demand. This kind of awareness builds emotional intelligence. You begin to see how your inner world responds to expectation. You notice when you're trying to protect an identity, when you're chasing approval, when you're avoiding disappointment. And instead of being pulled by those forces, you begin to meet them. You see the story before it becomes your behavior. Mindfulness of outcome fixation also shows up in communication. When you speak only to be understood or only to get agreement, you miss the moment. You shape your words to manage how you're received. But when you speak from presence, you say what's true, even if the outcome is uncertain. This doesn't mean being careless, it means being real. You begin to trust the quality of your expression more than the result it produces. In relationships, this changes everything. So much conflict arises not from what's said, but from the unspoken demand that things go a certain way, that the other person responds just how you hoped. But people don't follow your internal script, and when you let that go, you begin to listen differently. You stop trying to steer the conversation. You begin to hear what's actually being said. This doesn't mean you abandon your needs. It means you express them without manipulating. You stop speaking in ways that are designed to avoid discomfort. You start being honest, even when the outcome is uncertain. And that honesty builds deeper trust, both with yourself and with others. Mindfulness of outcome fixation also frees you from perfectionism. The belief that everything must unfold without flaw is a form of control. It paralyzes action. It shrinks your creativity. But when you see that the desire for perfection is rooted in fear, you can begin to act anyway. You let your work be good enough. You let your growth be messy. You give yourself room to learn. This kind of space allows you to take risks. You begin to move not because success is guaranteed, but because the action feels true. You detach from the fantasy that every step must be justified by a specific result. You begin to understand that some actions are right even if they don't lead where you thought they would. Over time, this becomes a habit, a new pattern. You move with intention, but without clutching. You care deeply, but you don't collapse when life unfolds differently. You hold your goals lightly. You trust your effort without demanding certainty. This trust grows with practice. It's built by returning to the present again and again, noticing when your mind rushes into the future, gently pulling it back, noticing the urge to control, choosing presence instead. This is not something you perfect, it's something you live, moment by moment. You begin to feel the difference in your body. The tension of forcing softens, the tightness around your expectations releases, your breath deepens. You're no longer bracing for impact. You're available to life, not just the life you wanted, but the life that's actually happening. Let this awareness continue. Let it grow into your smallest decisions and your biggest questions. Let it shape your way of listening, of speaking, of planning. Let it guide you not into passivity, but into a deeper kind of clarity, one that does not depend on control to feel safe. Because true freedom isn't found in things turning out the way you want. It's found in knowing that you can meet life fully, even when they don't. And that begins with the simple, powerful act of noticing, before the next step is taken. Even as mindfulness sharpens your awareness of control and the fixation on outcomes loosens its grip, something deeper remains underneath. It is the most persistent force behind urgency, perfectionism, and resistance to change. It hides in the background of nearly every grasping impulse. At the heart of control lies fear, not only of failure or disappointment or judgment, but of something final. The fear that time is slipping, that loss is unavoidable, that life will end. And this truth, often avoided or softened by distraction, is precisely what needs to be faced. Not with panic, but with clarity. This is where Maranasati begins, mindfulness of death. Contemplating death is not morbid. In Buddhist practice, it is an act of awakening. It cuts through illusion and places the present moment in full perspective. It shows what truly matters. It puts the idea of control into its proper context, not to frighten, but to liberate. Because the more clearly you see the certainty of death, the less interest you have in wasting life on things you cannot truly hold. This reflection begins not with philosophy, but with direct acknowledgement. You will die. This body, no matter how cared for, will not last. This name, this role, this story, they will pass. Everyone you love will also go. Everything you have will change hands or dissolve, and nothing you build will remain untouched by impermanence. When this is forgotten, urgency grows. You cling tighter. You rush to achieve, to fix, to secure. But when this is seen directly, a strange calm begins to rise, because in the face of death, control is revealed for what it is, a false protection, a shield made of ideas. You can't control when you die. You can't guarantee the safety of those you love. You can't stop time. No amount of planning or perfection will hold life in place. And when this becomes real, a different kind of surrender begins. Not despair, not numbness, but a deep, grounded letting go. The Buddha taught Maranasati not to cause fear, but to remove fear, because fear thrives in the unspoken. When death is denied, it grows in the shadows. But when death is seen clearly, it loses its hold. The contemplation becomes a mirror. It shows that what you're trying to secure with control is not actually secure at all, that the desire to manage every outcome is often a way to avoid the truth that nothing is guaranteed. This reflection changes your relationship to time. The obsession with saving time, filling time, managing time, all of it softens when you realize how little of it is actually yours to hold. Instead of trying to squeeze meaning into every second, you begin to appreciate the time you do have. You use it more wisely, not to do more, but to live with more honesty. You stop racing. You begin to listen. You prioritize depth over speed. It also changes your relationship to loss. When you resist death, every ending feels like an attack. But when you contemplate it regularly, endings stop being surprises. They become part of the rhythm. You expect them. You honor them. You don't love less. You love more deeply because you know that nothing lasts. This doesn't numb your emotions. It strengthens them with presence. It teaches you to show up while you still can. Maranasati teaches that every attachment you cling to, every identity, every possession, every plan is temporary. This is not a punishment. It's a call to presence. You stop trying to build permanence where there is none. You stop using control to avoid the discomfort of change. You learn to stand in the flow of life, not against it. This reflection also brings humility. You realize that no matter how strong, smart, or successful you are not above death. It puts everyone on equal ground. The need to prove, to impress, to outperform becomes meaningless when placed next to mortality. You stop comparing your life to others. You start focusing on how to live it well. It also teaches compassion. When you remember that everyone is moving toward the same end, you become softer. You judge less. You hold less resentment. The driver who cuts you off, the colleague who annoys you, the friend who disappoints you, they are all, like you, temporary. And that truth opens your heart. You stop taking everything so personally. You see the fragility in others and in yourself. Maranasati also changes your view of suffering. You stop expecting life to be easy. You stop hoping that control will remove pain. Instead, you begin to ask how to meet pain with clarity, how to suffer wisely without adding extra layers of resistance. You begin to understand that avoiding suffering is not the path. Facing it with presence is. This practice sharpens your priorities. It reveals what is noise and what is essential. Many of the things you stress about lose their urgency when placed next to death. You begin to let go of the opinions that don't matter, the arguments that drain your energy, the goals that aren't rooted in your values. You simplify, not out of fear, but from clarity. You also begin to make decisions more cleanly. When you know time is limited, you stop postponing honesty. You say what needs to be said. You walk away when it's time to walk. You commit when something truly matters. You stop delaying your own life out of indecision or fear of being wrong. This awareness brings freedom, because death ends control, but it also ends the illusion that you must have everything figured out. You realize you don't need to be perfect, you just need to be real. You stop hiding, you start showing up more fully, not for others, but because you've stopped believing you have unlimited time to be someone else. Maranasati is not a call to pessimism. It is a call to live while you can, to stop numbing, to stop escaping, to stop believing that control is what will make life meaningful. It is the invitation to step into life completely, with all its mess, beauty, uncertainty, and depth. This reflection deepens gratitude, not the kind you write down as a task, but the kind that flows naturally when you realize this moment will not return. You become grateful for things you used to ignore, a breath, a smile, a quiet hour. You no longer need life to be perfect. You just need to be awake for it. And perhaps most importantly, Maranasati helps you prepare, not for the moment of death itself, but for the moments leading to it. It teaches you how to live in such a way that when the end does come, you are not filled with regret, that you lived honestly, that you showed up, that you let go when it was time to let go. When practiced deeply, this contemplation removes urgency. You stop hurrying toward success. You stop trying to grasp every opportunity. You trust that what matters will come. You become more patient, more kind, more willing to wait and watch life unfold without interference. You also become more courageous, because when death is no longer avoided, you become braver in your choices. You take risks that matter. You speak truths that liberate. You no longer wait for perfect timing, because you know the only time is now. This courage is quiet. It's not about dramatic acts. It's about integrity. It's about saying yes to what is real and saying no to what isn't. It's about holding yourself to a standard, not of success, but of sincerity. Let this reflection be close. Let it sit with you in silence. Let it guide your next decision, your next interaction, your next breath. Not with heaviness, but with depth. Not with fear, but with presence. Because in remembering that life ends, you remember how to live, not in control, not in rush, but in reverence, fully, truthfully, and awake. When you come face to face with the truth of your own impermanence, something begins to shift. You stop pretending that control is protection. You stop filling your time with tasks that only hide your fear of loss. You start asking deeper questions. You begin to listen more carefully to the life around you and notice how little of it was ever fully in your hands. From this awareness, another truth begins to reveal itself. One that further softens the illusion of independence and challenges one of the most praised stories in modern life, the idea of being self-made. The belief that success is created by sheer personal willpower through strength, discipline, and intelligence alone is deeply embedded in many cultures. It's used to define worth, to assign praise or blame, to determine who is deserving. But in the light of Paticca Samuppada, the principle of dependent origination, this story falls apart. Not because effort doesn't matter, but because no action, no result, and no person stands alone. According to this teaching, everything arises based on causes and conditions. Nothing appears by itself. Nothing lasts by itself. Every thought, every emotion, every decision is shaped by a vast web of interconnection. You are not a single, solid self operating in isolation. You are part of a process, a movement that began long before you and will continue long after. This truth is not just philosophical, it's visible in your daily life. Think of a meal. The food on your plate exists because of the farmer, the soil, the rain, the transport system, the store, the people who harvested, cleaned, sold, or prepared it. Even a simple bite contains layers of unseen support. And this same network of support exists behind your successes, behind your education, your skills, your health, your access to tools, your environment, and every person who influenced your growth. Dependent origination teaches that nothing arises independently. Not a tree, not a thought, not a person's success. When you look at any achievement, your own or someone else's, and trace it back, you find conditions: family, teachers, timing, opportunity, health, and sometimes even luck. These aren't excuses. They're reality. They don't erase effort. They put it in context. This awareness dismantles arrogance. It shows that personal effort is real but not absolute. That the ground you walk on was prepared by many others, some known, some unknown. That behind every decision you make are layers of conditioning, environment, genetics, culture, and circumstance. And rather than take away your power, this recognition brings humility and gratitude. It also softens self-blame. When things don't go your way, it's easy to spiral into harshness, to believe that you failed because you're not enough. But dependent origination reminds you that outcomes are not entirely personal. Many things shape a result. Some you can influence, some you cannot. This doesn't free you from responsibility. It frees you from unrealistic expectations. This truth also changes how you relate to others. If you believe in the myth of being self-made, it's easy to look down on people who struggle, to assume they simply didn't try hard enough. But when you understand interdependence, you see that struggles often reflect missing conditions: safety, support, stability, opportunity. You stop seeing success and failure as moral judgments. You start seeing the full picture. This view encourages generosity. Because you realize how much you've received, you feel moved to pass it on, not from guilt, but from understanding. You don't just help others out of charity. You do it out of recognition that you are not separate. Their well-being is connected to yours. Their success helps create the conditions for a better world. one you also live in. This teaching also reshapes ambition. When you see yourself as part of a web, you stop trying to stand above it. You stop chasing individual glory at the expense of the whole. You begin to ask different questions, not just what can I build, but how can this effort benefit the system that holds me? Not just how far can I go, but what kind of world am I contributing to? In relationships, dependent origination invites deeper empathy. When someone reacts harshly or closes off, you pause. You consider what causes and conditions may have shaped their behavior. You don't excuse harm, but you stop assuming that everyone is acting from full freedom. You understand that healing requires more than insight. It requires a shift in the entire field of causes and conditions. This teaching also brings patience to personal growth. You no longer expect immediate transformation. You realize that change takes time, because conditions take time to shift. You become more forgiving of your patterns. You start asking, "What's missing here?" instead of "What's wrong with me?" This question opens doors. It invites curiosity and care instead of shame. Dependent origination invites you to think relationally, not in terms of isolated actions, but in systems. You begin to see how small changes ripple, how your choices affect the conditions around you, how your energy, words, and attention shape the field. You understand that your presence is never neutral. It either supports balance or feeds imbalance. This is why mindfulness matters, because when you are aware of your impact, you begin to act with more intention. You choose not only what benefits you, but what supports the health of the whole. You see that peace, kindness, and clarity are not just personal goals. They are contributions to the wider field of life. This truth also helps dissolve jealousy. When someone else succeeds, you don't assume it takes away from you. You understand that their success is not isolated. It came from conditions that are different from yours. And when those conditions are right, your own path will unfold. You don't need to compete. You need to tend to your ground. This teaching also encourages collaboration. The more you see how nothing arises alone, the more you value cooperation over competition. You stop trying to carry everything alone. You ask for help. You offer help. You recognize that progress often moves through relationship, not individual force. Even in spiritual practice, dependent origination brings clarity. You stop comparing your path to others. You understand that everyone's process is shaped by different causes, different habits, wounds, insights, and backgrounds. You stop rushing. You start focusing on what supports your growth now. You trust that with the right conditions, transformation will come. This also helps you let go of false pride. When others praise you, you accept it with grace, but you don't let it inflate your ego. You remember the people, the timing, the chances that helped you get here. You hold your success lightly, not because it doesn't matter, but because it's not only yours. And when things fall apart, this teaching provides resilience. You stop blaming fate or yourself. You ask what shifted in the conditions. You learn to respond, not just react. You understand that life is fluid, that endings are not failures. They are signals that new causes are needed. This view brings freedom from isolation. You stop carrying the burden of life as a solo project. You realize that asking for support is wise, not weak, that contributing to others is natural, not noble. You start to live in a way that acknowledges how deeply we belong to each other. Dependent origination is not just a concept to reflect on. It's a lens to live through. It reminds you that everything you do matters, not because you're the center of the universe, but because you're part of it. Every action supports or disrupts the field. Every choice either deepens harmony or strengthens confusion. Let this awareness shape the way you speak, work, rest, and relate. Let it remind you that no achievement is ever purely individual. Let it soften the pride that separates you and the shame that isolates you. Let it return you to humility, not the kind that makes you small, but the kind that makes you whole. Because in the web of life, no one stands alone, and when you understand this, you no longer need to pretend that you got here by yourself. You begin to walk differently, more aware, more generous, more grounded, and from that place, real strength grows. As the illusion of separation fades and the myth of self-made success dissolves under the light of interdependence, something deeper becomes visible. You begin to see not just how things arise, but also how easily perception becomes distorted. Even when you recognize that nothing happens in isolation, the mind still holds onto preferences, clings to expectations, and compares what is happening to what it thinks should be. This subtle gap between what is real and what is wanted becomes a quiet source of tension, and it's here that the practice of right view becomes essential. Right view is the foundation of the Buddhist path. It's not about beliefs, it's about perception. It trains the mind to see clearly without the filter of craving or resistance, to stop twisting reality into a shape that feels more comfortable and to begin relating to it as it actually is. This shift is not passive. It doesn't mean accepting harm or giving up on change. It means working with what is true, not what is hoped for, imagined, or demanded. The mind is often trained to move toward what I want. Goals, relationships, experiences, even spiritual growth, they're all filtered through personal preference. But when that preference is mistaken for truth, clarity is lost. You begin to live in a world of stories, assumptions, and reactivity. You respond not to what is, but to what you wish was happening instead. And in doing so, you miss the life in front of you. Right view breaks this pattern. It invites stillness before reaction. It invites observation before judgment. It asks you to see causes and conditions, not just conclusions. When something difficult arises, the habitual mind labels it bad, wrong, unfair. But right view asks, what made this arise? What's actually happening beneath the label? This doesn't mean you suppress your feelings. It means you explore them with precision. Anger, sadness, joy, fear, all of it becomes material for understanding. You stop identifying with the emotion. You start witnessing it. You stop saying, this shouldn't be happening, and start asking, what is this teaching me? Right view also helps you detect the mind's tricks. It shows how desire distorts reality. When you want something badly, the mind exaggerates its value. It ignores the costs. It creates stories to justify getting it. The same happens with aversion. When you fear something, the mind magnifies its threat. It narrows your vision. But with right view, you begin to hold that desire or fear in awareness without immediately acting on it. You learn to see your thoughts about reality as different from reality itself. This view also challenges the way comparison arises. The mind often wants to measure how far ahead or behind you are, who has more or less, who is winning or failing. But these comparisons are based on a distorted lens. They ignore the complex web of causes that shape each person's life. They turn others into mirrors of your own insecurity. Right view helps you step back from this pattern and meet your path with attention, not judgment. It also brings steadiness when things change. Most suffering comes not from change itself, but from resisting it. Right view trains you to expect change, to understand that everything arises and passes based on conditions. It teaches you that nothing is fixed. Not your identity, not your circumstances, not even your thoughts. You begin to trust that the truth of the moment is always shifting, and that your job is not to hold it in place, but to move with it wisely. This shift in perception also applies to your view of others. You stop reducing people to their behavior. You recognize that every action is shaped by unseen forces: trauma, fear, culture, upbringing. Right view doesn't justify harm, but it helps you see that people are not their worst moment. You respond with clarity, not punishment, with boundaries, not blame. It brings a new honesty to your spiritual path as well. You stop chasing peak experiences or idealized states. You begin to value grounded awareness. You stop thinking that insight must always feel profound. You start trusting the quiet knowing that grows over time. Right view reminds you that truth is not always dramatic. Often it's subtle, a soft shift in how you hold your experience. This view becomes especially important when navigating loss or failure. The mind wants to label these as proof that something has gone wrong. But with right view, you see that pain is not punishment. That discomfort is not the enemy. That failure is often the next condition in the path of growth. You learn to meet these moments without collapsing. You learn to respond without panic. Right view is not rigid. It adapts to context. It doesn't mean always being neutral or detached. Sometimes, right view means taking strong action. Sometimes it means stepping back. The key is not what you do, but whether your action is based on what's real. Are you seeing clearly or reacting blindly? Are you aligned with the truth of the situation or just avoiding discomfort? This clarity also changes how you approach goals. When you move from what I want to what is, your goals become expressions of truth, not escape plans. You stop trying to control every step. You focus on intention and effort, not obsession with results. You trust that your responsibility is to act with integrity, not to force the outcome. Right view also reveals how deeply craving influences perception. When the mind wants pleasure, it overlooks warning signs. When it wants to avoid pain, it dismisses necessary truth. This bias affects every layer of decision-making. Right view shines light on these blind spots. It teaches you to ask, am I seeing clearly or just seeing what I want to see? This brings more integrity to your daily life. You stop making choices out of habit or fear. You begin to listen more carefully to your body, to others, to the moment. You trust your intuition more, not because it always gives you answers, but because it becomes rooted in clarity, not emotion. Over time, this practice transforms your inner landscape. You stop living in resistance. You stop needing things to always match your preferences. You begin to meet life with interest, not expectation. You stop trying to predict or manipulate the future. You start showing up for what's here. This doesn't mean becoming passive. Right view supports wise action, but it asks you to take action from reality, not fantasy. You plan, you prepare, you work, but without illusion. You know that conditions change, that nothing is guaranteed, and so your effort becomes clean, steady, flexible. In conversations, right view teaches you to hear what's really being said, not just what you assume or fear. You ask more questions. You pause before reacting. You listen without preparing your reply. You stop defending your image. You start listening with your whole attention. This view also protects you from self-deception. The mind wants to avoid what's painful to see. It wants to stay comfortable. But right view challenges this. It invites discomfort. It tells you that truth is more valuable than comfort, that growth requires honesty, that peace requires facing what is real, even when it's difficult. Let this awareness continue to deepen. Let it guide how you read situations, how you respond to emotion, how you plan your day. Let it remind you that perception is powerful, and that clarity is not something that happens once, but something you practice in every moment. Because when you begin to see what is truly there, not just what you want to see, you begin to live with real wisdom. You stop arguing with reality. You stop needing life to match your preferences. You begin to meet life as it is, and that meeting point is where freedom begins. As perception shifts from craving to clarity, and you begin to meet life as it truly is, rather than how you wish it to be, something else becomes more obvious: the invisible pressure of time. Even when you start seeing with right view, the clock continues ticking in the background of your mind. You feel it in your breath, your schedule, your comparisons, your fears. It doesn't just push you forward, it weighs on your choices. It shows up as urgency, frustration, restlessness, and often the suffering tied to time doesn't come from time itself, but from the way we relate to it. Buddhism offers a different relationship to time, one that is not linear, not rigid, and not measured by deadlines. It invites you to step outside the belief that progress must follow a strict path, or that worth is proven through speed. It helps you see that urgency is often another form of control, and that clinging to specific timelines is a quiet way of saying, "This moment isn't enough." Letting go of time does not mean letting go of responsibility. It means releasing the anxiety that your life must unfold according to a mental schedule. It means understanding that spiritual growth, healing, creativity, love, none of these obey your preferred timing. They have their own rhythm. They unfold when the conditions are right, not when your calendar demands it. This perspective starts to shift how you view progress. In a linear mindset, progress is always forward. More is better. Faster is stronger. But in Buddhist insight, progress is circular, spiral, even still at times. Some of the most meaningful changes happen when nothing seems to be happening. Silence, pause, waiting. These are not delays. They are part of the process. When you cling to time, you rush. You move faster than your wisdom. You make decisions based on impatience, not alignment. You force conversations before they're ready. You push yourself toward goals that no longer serve you. This creates exhaustion. not from doing too much, but from constantly resisting the present. Letting go of time means dropping the inner stopwatch. It means no longer measuring your growth, your healing, your rest, your relationships against an imagined clock. It means trusting that things are always moving, even when you can't see the movement. That your pace is not wrong, that slowness is not failure. This view helps release the pressure of late blooming, the belief that by a certain age you should have achieved, become, proven something. That narrative is not rooted in truth. It is a cultural story, one that often ignores your actual life experience. Letting go of time means letting yourself bloom when the conditions are finally right, not when the world tells you to. It also frees you from comparing timelines with others. Every person's path is shaped by different causes and conditions. No two lives are meant to unfold the same way. The idea that someone is ahead or behind is an illusion. You begin to understand that being where you are is not a problem. It's your starting point, and it's enough. This shift allows you to make peace with delay. Waiting is no longer an obstacle. It becomes part of the unfolding. You begin to listen more carefully during pauses. You stop trying to fill every moment. You learn to rest in the in-between, to trust that sometimes nothing happening on the outside means deep integration is happening within. Even in daily tasks, letting go of time changes the energy behind what you do. You start cooking, writing, working, relating, not to check things off a list, but to engage fully. Time slows, not because the clock stops, but because your attention deepens. You experience more of life in each moment. This practice softens your fear of aging. The idea that life diminishes with time begins to dissolve. You stop rushing to stay young, relevant, or impressive. You begin to value presence over appearance, depth over speed. You realize that wisdom doesn't follow a linear path, that some things can only be understood with time, and that the process itself is the teacher. It also helps you face uncertainty. When you're no longer trying to control how quickly things resolve, you become more stable in the unknown. You stop demanding answers before they're ready. You stop assuming that discomfort means something is wrong. You learn to stay with the questions longer, to allow clarity to arrive on its own. This view transforms how you relate to goals. Instead of racing toward a result, you begin to move from purpose. You act because it aligns with your truth, not because you're running out of time. You're no longer chasing milestones. You're cultivating presence. And that presence often leads to more meaningful results. Not because you forced them, but because you stopped rushing them. Letting go of time also restores joy. When you're no longer focused on how much time you have left or how far you have to go, you begin to enjoy where you are. You notice the small moments, the sound of leaves, the way your breath feels, the light through a window. These moments don't look like progress, but they are what a full life is made of. In relationships, this softens expectations. You stop needing people to grow or change on your schedule. You begin to accept others where they are. You stop pushing connection before it's ready. You let people take their own path, just as you take yours. This doesn't mean you wait forever. It means you stop forcing. You learn the timing of trust. This view also changes your inner dialogue. You speak to yourself with more patience. You stop saying, "I should be further along." You begin to ask, "What is this moment asking of me?" You stop measuring your worth by speed or achievement. You begin to honor your own rhythm, and that respect becomes the ground for growth. Letting go of time helps you accept impermanence with more ease. You stop fighting the fact that all things end. Instead, you allow endings to shape your presence. You begin to cherish more and cling less. You stop delaying love. You stop waiting to start. You understand that the time is now, not because it's urgent, but because it's real. This does not mean you live without structure. It means you hold structure with flexibility. You still make plans. You still keep commitments. But you don't let schedules define your worth. You don't let time pressure override your awareness. You allow the flow of life to inform your timing, not just your to-do list. In spiritual practice, this brings depth. You stop expecting instant transformation. You stop rushing to feel better. You begin to settle into longer processes. You understand that insight ripens in layers, that some teachings must be lived before they're understood, that growth is not always felt, but it's always moving. Let this awareness settle into your breath. Let it loosen the grip of urgency. Let it shift the way you plan, the way you wait, the way you respond. Let it teach you that freedom does not come from perfect timing, but from releasing your demands on time itself. Because peace is not hidden in the future, it's here, underneath the rush, quiet, steady, waiting to be seen. When you begin releasing your grip on time, the mental deadlines, the anxious pacing, the belief that everything must unfold now, a softer rhythm starts to emerge. One that doesn't rush or delay, but flows in alignment with what the moment truly needs. In that space, urgency no longer drives your behavior, but something subtler still remains, the ego's wish to shape, to fix, to control. Even without a clock pushing you, there may still be a voice inside that says, "I must make this happen." This voice can be relentless, and often it hides beneath the surface of good intentions. To meet it fully, what's needed is not more willpower, but compassion. Compassion, or karuna, is not sentimental. It's not about rescuing, pleasing, or becoming passive. It's a direct, heartfelt response to suffering, your own and others. And its power lies in how it dissolves the tightness of ego. Ego wants to control outcomes to protect its sense of importance. Compassion doesn't need to control anything. It sees pain and chooses to stay open anyway. It doesn't panic when things go wrong. It doesn't withdraw when discomfort arises. It simply remains present and engaged. When you meet yourself with compassion, the need to force your way through life starts to fade. You no longer try to bully yourself into growth. You stop defining your worth by your productivity or success. You understand that you're human, imperfect, changing, learning. And this kindness toward your own imperfection makes room for transformation without pressure. The ego, at its root, fears being powerless. It fears failure, rejection, and loss. So it reacts by trying to dominate. It creates rigid goals, expectations, identities. It builds strategies for being right, being seen, being in control. But compassion allows you to turn toward these fears without judgment. It allows you to say, "This hurts, this is hard, but I don't need to fix or prove anything right now. I can simply be here." This internal shift makes your outer actions less reactive. you begin to act from care, not from defense. You speak with understanding, not just with the goal of being understood. You choose what's helpful, not what's most impressive. And because you're no longer obsessed with control, you become more effective. You listen more deeply. You respond more wisely. You give others space to be human too. Compassion also helps dissolve the habit of perfectionism. When ego leads, there's a constant pressure to get things exactly right. Every mistake becomes a threat to your image. But compassion sees mistakes as part of the learning process. It doesn't excuse harm, it simply recognizes that growth involves stumbling. This recognition doesn't make you careless, it makes you more patient and courageous. In relationships, compassion softens the impulse to control how others see you. It allows you to be honest without managing their response. You become more real. You let go of the need to impress or please. And this authenticity builds trust. People can feel when you're not performing. They can feel when your care is genuine. Compassion also prevents burnout. When you act from ego, your energy becomes strained. You try to carry everything alone. You believe that letting go means weakness. But when compassion guides you, you start to notice your limits. You rest without guilt. You say no without shame. You begin to trust that your worth doesn't come from endless doing. It comes from your presence, your sincerity, your ability to care without controlling. This shift changes how you view challenges. The ego wants to fix problems quickly to avoid discomfort. Compassion stays longer. It asks deeper questions. It doesn't rush to solve. It listens. And often, this patient presence reveals insights that force could never reach. You begin to understand that not all suffering needs to be removed right away. Some of it needs to be witnessed. When you meet others with compassion, their defensiveness often softens. Control creates resistance. Compassion creates connection. It says, "I see your pain, and I don't need to change you to be okay." This space allows for real transformation, not because you forced it, but because you stopped demanding it. Even in leadership or influence, compassion brings balance. Without it, power can become manipulation. You start to see people as means to an end, but compassion brings you back to service. You lead not to control outcomes, but to support growth. You stop managing people through fear or pressure. You create environments where truth can emerge. Compassion also reduces inner conflict. So much of the ego's tension comes from resisting your own emotions. When you feel anxious, you try to suppress it. When you're tired, you push through it. When you're angry, you judge yourself. But compassion welcomes these states. It doesn't indulge them. It simply holds them without rejection. And in that holding, they begin to shift. This inner peace makes it easier to let go of certainty. The ego wants to know exactly how everything will turn out. Compassion says, even if I don't know, I can still care. I can still act. It allows you to show up in the unknown without needing to control it. It brings courage, not the kind that forces, but the kind that stays present. In spiritual practice, compassion dissolves spiritual ambition. The desire to be more advanced, more peaceful, more enlightened. It can become another ego trap. But Karuna reminds you that the path isn't about becoming superior. It's about becoming more available to the suffering around you, more real, more present, less divided. This quality also helps you face injustice with clarity. Compassion doesn't mean passive acceptance of harm. It means responding without hatred. It means taking action rooted in care, not blame. It means using your voice, your body, your resources, not to punish, but to heal. Compassion is not soft. It's strong, steady, unshaken by outcome. Even in moments of failure, compassion stays. It doesn't abandon you when things fall apart. It reminds you that your value does not disappear with your plans, that your heart can stay open even in disappointment. This is how resilience is born, not from pushing through, but from softening into what's here without self-attack. Compassion toward yourself is what makes compassion for others sustainable. When you don't punish your own limits, you don't resent others for theirs. You become less reactive, less critical. You see people as mirrors, not enemies. You stop taking things so personally. You begin to understand that everyone is carrying something unseen. Let compassion shape your day. Let it guide your decisions, your tone, your plans. Let it replace force with care, tension with warmth. Not because things will go perfectly, but because you're no longer trying to dominate reality. You're learning how to meet it with presence, with honesty, with a heart that no longer needs to control in order to feel safe. In that heart, there is room for everything, for growth, for failure, for joy, for grief, for letting go. And in that letting go, the ego's grip weakens, not through resistance, but through kindness. Because what the ego tries to fix with control, compassion begins to heal with presence. And from that healing, your actions change, not because you've forced them, but because you've allowed them to arise from something deeper, something softer, something true. When compassion begins to take the place of control, you stop needing to shape every moment with pressure. You soften in the presence of difficulty. You allow space for yourself and others to unfold. The urge to dominate slowly gives way to curiosity, to care. But even compassion, when stretched too thin by constant motion, can become strained. There comes a point when even the most sincere presence needs rest, not to escape, but to reset. This is the wisdom behind stepping back, not as retreat in fear, but as retreat in strength. A sacred pause where growth is not pushed, but permitted. In Buddhist practice, this is deeply understood. Monks and practitioners throughout history have stepped away from the world not because they rejected it, but because they knew something essential happens in silence, in stillness, in separation from the noise of constant doing. This isn't isolation for the sake of escape. It's space for clarity to surface, a chance to listen without interruption. And within this space, something surprising often happens. Progress accelerates without force. The modern mind often resists retreat. It sees withdrawal as weakness or laziness. It associates stepping back with falling behind. But that assumption is built on the illusion that constant movement equals effectiveness. The truth is, many of the most meaningful changes happen when nothing external appears to be changing at all. Insight, integration, and deep transformation often require silence and slowness. Creating space doesn't mean abandoning responsibility. It means honoring rhythm. Every system, biological, emotional, mental, needs rest to recover, to process, to reorganize. When you pause, You give your nervous system permission to reset. You allow your thoughts to settle like silt in still water, and when the water clears, you can finally see the truth beneath. In retreat, the pressure to perform falls away. You no longer need to meet the demands of others. You don't need to explain yourself, compete, or impress. This emptiness creates room for truth to surface. Not the kind shaped by expectation, but the kind that's always been waiting under the noise. You stop hearing just the loudest parts of yourself and start hearing the parts you've ignored. Pulling back also reveals patterns. When you step out of the cycle of constant doing, you begin to see what drives your action. You notice the automatic responses, the subtle compulsions, the hidden motivations that shape your behavior. In daily life, these patterns are easy to miss because you're too close to them. But with distance, they become clearer, not for judgment, but for understanding. In this understanding, healing happens, not by force, but by permission. The body begins to relax in ways it hasn't before. The mind loosens its grip on control. Emotions that were pushed aside finally rise and release. Not because you analyze them, but because you gave them space to move. This is what makes retreat powerful. It doesn't solve problems by thinking harder. It allows the deeper intelligence of the body and heart to do their quiet work. Stepping back also changes how you relate to goals. You start to see which ones came from truth and which came from fear. You begin to feel which dreams still resonate and which have expired. Without the pressure to prove or produce, your inner compass resets. You remember why you began. And if the original reasons no longer hold, you are free to begin again. This freedom makes it easier to release what no longer fits. In the quiet of retreat, it becomes obvious which habits and roles are draining your energy. You no longer need a dramatic crisis to justify letting go. You simply feel the difference between what nourishes you and what depletes you. That clarity doesn't always come through thinking. It often comes through silence. In monastic life, retreats are not escapes. They are resets. They are structured, deliberate, and purposeful. Time is given not just to rest, but to reconnect with the breath, with the present, with reality as it is. You don't retreat to avoid the world. You retreat to meet it with greater awareness. Even short periods of retreat, a few hours, a day, a weekend, can have profound effects. They allow the mind to drop below surface-level thinking. They restore balance. They make space for insight. They renew the body's energy. You don't need to disappear into the mountains to benefit. You need only to create conditions where quiet is allowed to take root. What unfolds in this quiet is not always comfortable. Retreats bring forward what you've avoided, but they also bring the strength to meet it. When you are no longer caught in constant reaction, you can respond with more clarity. When you are no longer pulled by urgency, you can move with deeper purpose. This practice also redefines productivity. You begin to see that being effective isn't about doing more. It's about doing what matters when it's time. And to know what matters, you must be quiet long enough to hear your own truth. Retreat gives you that opportunity. It reminds you that inner wisdom is not missing. It's just crowded out by noise. In this space, the ego's narrative starts to fade. The need to manage every detail, to control every outcome, begins to lose strength, because you've stepped away from the game where worth is earned by performance. And in that pause, you realize that your value isn't based on output. It never was. This realization doesn't make you passive, it makes you free. When you return from retreat, even a brief one, the world hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has. You respond more deliberately. You make fewer decisions from panic. You say yes with clarity and no with kindness. You are less reactive, more centered, more whole, not because you added something new, but because you remembered what was already there. Retreat also teaches you to be alone without loneliness. You begin to feel the richness of your own company. You stop needing constant input or interaction. You learn how to listen inwardly. And from that listening, a new kind of strength arises. Not the strength to fight harder, but the strength to move with grace. In time, you realize that retreat is not separate from life. It is a way of life, a rhythm, a returning. You carry its lessons with you into daily interactions, into work, into love, into conflict. You stop filling every space. You begin to honor the value of stillness, even in motion. Let yourself create this space, even for a few minutes a day. Let yourself pause without guilt. Let the silence speak. Let the body rest. Let the heart unclench. Because from that place of quiet, outcomes unfold not by force, but by alignment. You don't need to push, you need to listen. And in listening, you begin to hear what your life has been trying to tell you all along. When you give yourself permission to step back, when you stop forcing action and allow space for quiet unfolding, something deeper becomes visible. Not just inside of you, but all around you. You start to see that the world keeps turning, even when you're not holding it up. That growth continues even when you rest. That wisdom arises when you stop trying to chase it. In the silence of retreat, there is a quiet truth. You are not doing life alone. You never were. This is the beginning of interbeing. Interbeing is a teaching most clearly expressed through the words and life of Thich Nhat Hanh. It is not just a philosophy. It is an invitation to see the world differently, to recognize that nothing exists by itself. Everything leans on everything else. Every breath, every movement, every event is part of a web of relationship. When this is seen, the pressure to control softens and trust begins to take its place. You are taught from an early age to be independent, to achieve alone, to carry your own weight. This can create strength, but it also creates isolation. It builds the illusion that you must figure out everything by yourself, that you must succeed through your own effort alone. But this belief hides the deeper truth, that life is a shared movement, that nothing arises in isolation, that even your breath is not yours alone. It comes from trees, from clouds, from oceans, from the sun. Interbeing points to this truth with quiet power. The food on your plate was grown by many hands. The ideas in your mind were shaped by books, teachers, and conversations. Your resilience was nourished by those who showed you kindness. Even your struggles were shaped by conditions beyond your control. Nothing stands alone. This understanding dissolves the myth of self-sufficiency. It doesn't make you weak, it makes you connected. It allows you to stop pretending that you must carry everything by yourself. It invites you to lean into the support that has always been there, not just from people, but from nature, from silence, from the structure of life itself. Trusting into being means accepting that life is not a personal project. It is a collective unfolding. You are part of something larger than your plans, larger than your identity. And when you begin to trust that, you stop needing to manipulate every detail. You stop believing that you're responsible for holding everything together. This trust does not make you passive. It makes you more available. You begin to act not from panic, but from participation. You stop trying to master the flow and start learning how to move with it. You stop seeing others as separate. You recognize that their pain is not different from yours, that their joy is part of your joy, that to care for yourself is to care for the whole. This also changes how you respond to setbacks. When you feel disconnected, unsupported, or lost, the ego says, "You failed, you're alone." But interbeing says, "You are part of something that includes this too. This moment is not the end. It is a thread in a much larger tapestry." And that shift in perspective brings steadiness. It also redefines how you see your contributions. The mind often says, "If I can't do something big, it's not enough." But interbeing teaches that every small act ripples. A kind word, a shared silence, a single breath of patience. These shape the field. You don't need to control the entire system. You only need to meet the moment well. Trust in interbeing also transforms ambition. When you realize that everything is connected, you stop chasing success as a separate outcome. You begin to ask, "What am I building that others can stand on?" You stop striving to stand out and start focusing on how to serve. And in that shift, a different kind of fulfillment arises, one that does not depend on recognition. This teaching also dissolves comparison. If all things arise through interconnection, then comparing timelines or achievements becomes meaningless. Your path is shaped by different conditions, different support systems, different roles in the whole. You stop measuring your value against someone else's moment. You start honoring where you are, because where you are contributes to where we all are. Interbeing brings humility. You recognize that you are both supported and supportive, that your presence matters not because you control everything, but because you are part of the movement. You become more careful with your energy, more respectful of life, more patient with change. You begin to see your life as a contribution, not a competition. This insight also allows you to forgive. When you see others through the lens of interbeing, you realize that their actions are also shaped by causes you may never see. This does not excuse harm, but it helps you understand it. It softens your anger. It makes space for compassion, not just as a feeling, but as a recognition of shared humanity. Trusting interbeing also invites surrender, not the kind that gives up, but the kind that accepts you are not the only force at work. You stop trying to force results. You start planting seeds with care, trusting that the conditions for growth will come. Maybe now, maybe later. Maybe through you, maybe through someone else. But you no longer need to grip so tightly. This surrender allows you to rest. When you know you are not the only one shaping the path, you stop feeling the need to fix everything. You begin to pace yourself. You ask for help. You delegate. You breathe. And from that place, your energy returns because it's no longer being drained by pressure. This trust also reveals the sacredness of ordinary moments. When you are not rushing toward the next result, you begin to see the beauty in what's already here. A sip of tea, the wind through leaves, the kindness in a stranger's eyes. These moments are not distractions, they are life. They are reminders that you are not outside of the world. You are woven into it. Even in grief, interbeing offers comfort. The people you love are never truly lost. Their influence lives in your gestures, your words, your presence. What they gave continues through you, and what you give will continue through others. In this way, no life is isolated. No love is ever wasted. Everything continues in new forms. Let this teaching sink into your daily rhythm. Let it shape how you speak, how you plan, how you rest. Let it soften the voice that says you must do it all alone. Let it remind you that you are held by the sky, the earth, the breath, the people who care for you, the moments that guide you forward. You don't need to be in charge of everything. You don't need to prove your worth by carrying the world. You are part of the world. And that belonging is more powerful than control. When you begin to trust the truth of interbeing, the pressure to control, to isolate, to do it all yourself starts to dissolve. You see how everything you are and everything you become is supported by a network so vast it cannot be measured. You stop pretending that your worth comes from standing apart. You start to feel the deep freedom of being part of something greater. But even within this web of connection, there still exists a force that keeps pulling. The mind's tendency to reach, grasp, accumulate, hold. The belief that having more, achieving more, or being more will finally make you enough. And this is where the path of renunciation becomes not a retreat from life, but a return to it. Renunciation, or nekama, is often misunderstood. To many it sounds like loss, giving things up, turning away from joy, living in restriction. But in the Buddhist path, renunciation is not about punishment or deprivation. It is about letting go of what binds you so that you can live with more space, more clarity, more truth. It is not about less life. It is about more freedom within life. This kind of letting go is not forced. It is chosen. It doesn't come from fear or shame. It comes from seeing clearly. You begin to recognize the habits and desires that do not lead to peace. You feel their weight. You notice how certain patterns of grasping leave you more exhausted than fulfilled, and eventually the release becomes obvious. Not because someone tells you to give something up, but because you no longer want to carry what drains your spirit. Renunciation becomes empowerment when you see it not as rejection, but as alignment. You are no longer willing to trade your peace for short-term comfort. You are no longer available for the endless loop of craving and disappointment. You step away not because life is bad, but because you want to meet it with your whole self, unburdened, undistracted, awake. This form of release starts internally. It's not just about letting go of physical things. It's about releasing mental clutter, emotional loops, false narratives. Letting go of the need to be right, to be praised, to be seen a certain way. Letting go of roles that no longer fit. Letting go of the story that you need to prove your worth by constantly achieving. From the outside, it might look like sacrifice, but from within, it feels like a return. You begin to reclaim your energy. You begin to choose stillness over performance, depth over distraction, simplicity over noise. And in doing so, you start to feel more present. You stop being pulled in 10 directions at once. You begin to live in one piece. Renunciation also helps untangle you from compulsion. The ego thrives on automatic doing. It tells you to chase one goal after another. It tells you that rest is weakness, that silence is empty. But when you begin to release this cycle, you realize how much energy you've been wasting on what never brought peace. You begin to choose differently, not because you're resisting pleasure, but because you're no longer fooled by its temporary relief. This practice also sharpens discernment. You begin to ask deeper questions. What truly nourishes me? What leaves me feeling hollow? What supports my clarity? What pulls me into confusion? Renunciation becomes a form of wisdom. You start to say no, not as denial, but as devotion. You no longer chase what doesn't matter. Even in relationships, this path becomes clear. You stop clinging to people from fear of being alone. You stop holding on to connections that no longer reflect truth. You no longer need someone else to complete you or fix your pain. You release the grasping, and in that space, real love becomes possible. Love without dependency, without pressure, without control. Renunciation also creates room for joy. Not the joy that comes from stimulation, but the joy that rises quietly when your heart is no longer divided. You begin to delight in stillness. You feel beauty in simplicity. You stop needing constant input to feel alive. The mind becomes clearer, the body becomes lighter, the heart becomes softer. This freedom makes your practice more honest. You are no longer meditating to escape pain or to reach some ideal state. You're not performing spirituality. You're present. You begin to sit not to achieve peace, but to remember it. You renounce the need for progress. You return to the breath. You return to what is already here. This doesn't mean you walk away from the world. It means you meet it differently. You work, you serve, you love, but without being entangled. You stop needing things to go your way. You stop holding on to what is already passing. You stop forcing outcomes. And in that release, your actions become more powerful, not because you're doing more, but because you're doing what is needed, nothing extra. Renunciation also protects your time. You begin to see how many hours are lost in unconscious habits, scrolling, consuming, comparing, distracting, not because you're lazy, but because you're afraid to feel what's underneath. But when you begin to let go of avoidance, time expands. You start living deliberately. You start choosing your focus, and with that focus comes depth. This path is not about denying pleasure. It's about seeing which pleasures bring peace and which bring noise. It's about choosing the kind of happiness that doesn't fade when the moment ends. You stop running towards stimulation and start leaning into contentment. You begin to understand that less craving means more presence. Less reaching means more connection. There is power in this simplicity, a kind of dignity that doesn't depend on status or success. You stop needing to decorate your life to prove its value. You begin to love the ordinary. You find beauty in what is quiet, unnoticed, real. Your attention sharpens. Your heart becomes more available. You start living from essence, not from image. Renunciation also builds strength. Because letting go is not always easy. It asks you to face what you've avoided. It asks you to stand in discomfort without reaching for distraction. It teaches you to hold pain without collapsing, to feel emptiness without rushing to fill it. This strength is not hard or rigid. It's the strength of someone who trusts their own clarity more than their cravings. Over time, this practice brings peace, not the fragile peace of getting what you want, but the deep peace of not needing it anymore. You are no longer tossed by every craving. You are no longer pushed by every urge. You live with fewer demands. And in that spaciousness, joy arises. A joy that doesn't depend on changing anything, because the heart itself has changed. This path is not distant or cold. It is full of life, full of presence. It asks not for less feeling, but for clearer feeling. Not for less connection, but for deeper connection. Not for less engagement, but for wiser engagement. You let go not to escape, but to return to what matters, to what's real, to what you no longer want to live without. Let this way of letting go become your strength. Let it be the doorway back to yourself. Let it show you that you do not need to carry what hurts you, that you are allowed to rest, that you are allowed to choose peace, even if it means walking away from things others chase. Because you have begun to see some things are only heavy because they are no longer yours to hold. When you begin to let go, not from avoidance, but from clarity, something inside you softens. The space that renunciation creates is not empty. It's full of truth. You begin to see more clearly what you've been carrying and why. And often, in that stillness, something long buried comes to the surface. Pain, not just physical or emotional discomfort, but the raw, unfiltered kind of pain that has been hidden behind striving, control, and distraction. Letting go doesn't erase pain. It simply removes the noise around it. And when that noise is gone, you finally face the truth. Pain is not what breaks you. Resistance is. This is where the Buddha's teaching of the two arrows becomes essential. He described it in simple terms. The first arrow is the unavoidable pain of being human. Illness, loss, failure, aging, disappointment. It is part of life. No one escapes it. But the second arrow is the suffering we create around that pain. The mental story, the judgment, the fear, the resistance. The second arrow is not inevitable. It is optional, and it is often more painful than the first. When pain arises, the instinct is to resist, to push it away, to avoid it, deny it, fix it, or numb it. But resistance is a reaction, not a solution. The more you fight pain, the more tightly it holds on. The mind tries to escape it by blaming, comparing, or replaying the past. The body tenses, the breath shortens, and all of this adds a layer of suffering that wasn't there to begin with. Mindfulness invites a different response. Instead of reacting, it asks you to turn toward the pain with curiosity. Not to indulge it or dramatize it, but to meet it directly. To feel the first arrow, fully, honestly, without adding the second. This doesn't mean you enjoy pain. It means you stop amplifying it. You allow it to rise and fall without building a prison around it. This shift changes everything. You begin to notice when you're making things harder than they need to be. A difficult conversation becomes 10 times heavier when you rehearse it for days in your mind. A small mistake becomes a wound when you replay it with shame. The actual experience may have passed, but the second arrow keeps it alive. And often, the second arrow lasts longer than the first. Seeing this clearly gives you power, not to avoid pain, but to stop making it worse. You start catching yourself in the act of layering suffering on top of discomfort. You notice the should that follows disappointment, the self-criticism that follows sadness, the fear that follows uncertainty. And you begin to ask, is this the second arrow? The answer is often yes. And with that awareness, you can stop. You don't need to add judgment to grief. You don't need to add fear to fatigue. You don't need to add resistance to loss. The pain is already here. Adding more won't protect you. It will only close your heart. This teaching also applies to outcome clinging. When things don't go the way you hoped, the first arrow may be loss or disappointment, but the second arrow is the belief that it shouldn't have happened, that you failed, that life is unfair. These stories don't ease the pain, they deepen it. Clinging to a version of how things should be creates tension around how they are. When you begin to release those stories, pain becomes cleaner. It hurts, but it passes. You cry, but you don't collapse. You feel anger, but you don't lose your center. You are able to stay with what is, without spiraling into what could have been. This is not detachment, it is presence. Allowing pain without resistance also strengthens compassion. When you know what it's like to feel sadness without shame, fear without failure, you become more patient with others. You stop needing people to feel better just to ease your own discomfort. You allow space for them to have their process, just as you've learned to have yours. This also helps you navigate healing. Often, the hardest part of healing is not the original wound, but your judgment of it. You think, I should be over this by now. You feel shame for still hurting, but the second arrow never heals the first. Only kindness does. Only patience does. Only meeting the pain without a story lets it move through. This approach also shifts your response to fear. When fear arises, the mind wants to fight or flee, but often fear is just a signal, not a threat. When you stop reacting to fear as a failure, you can listen to it. You can feel it without obeying it. You can meet it with steadiness, and slowly it loses its grip. In daily life, this awareness becomes practical. A delay, a misstep, an unexpected change, all of these are first arrows. But what you add afterward makes the difference. Do you tighten, blame, rush to fix? Or do you pause, breathe, notice, respond? The habit is to resist. The practice is to allow. This doesn't mean you stop taking action. It means you take action without panic. You move from clarity, not from reactivity. You don't waste energy on stories that keep you stuck. You face what is needed without turning every challenge into a crisis. Over time, this changes your relationship with discomfort. You stop fearing it. You stop needing life to be free of pain. You start trusting that you can meet what comes. Not because you enjoy suffering, but because you no longer fear the first arrow. You've learned that the second arrow is where most of the suffering lives. This trust also brings a sense of dignity. You don't need to collapse in the face of hardship. You don't need to hide your pain or exaggerate it. You meet it directly with presence. And in doing so, you discover that your strength does not come from avoiding difficulty, but from your ability to remain whole within it. Let this teaching settle into your awareness. Let it guide the way you meet your next hard moment. Let it remind you that pain is not the enemy, resistance is. That presence is stronger than panic. That clarity is more powerful than control, because the first arrow may be sharp, but the second is often your own hand. And the moment you stop driving it deeper, you begin to heal. As you stop firing the second arrow, something unexpected happens. The pain remains, but it becomes lighter. The moment still hurts, but it no longer defines you. You begin to see clearly how much suffering is created not by what happens, but by how you respond. This shift marks a new kind of intelligence, one that sees that not every difficulty is a problem to fix, and not every discomfort is a battle to win. From this understanding, the ground becomes fertile for another essential teaching: skillful means. Skillful means, or upaya, is the art of wisdom in context. It is the understanding that truth is not always about doing more. Sometimes it is about stepping back, softening, or doing nothing at all. In the Buddhist tradition, skillful means is not about following rigid rules. It is about meeting the moment with clarity and adapting to what it actually needs. It asks, what works here? What leads to less harm? What supports awareness, even if it doesn't look like success? This path often looks different from what the ego wants. The ego says, act now, fix it, prove something. But skillful means says, wait, listen, let go. It does not confuse reactivity with wisdom. It understands that doing for the sake of doing can add confusion, not clarity. And it recognizes that restraint, when born from understanding, is not weakness, it's mastery. Letting go as a form of action may sound passive, but it is often the most engaged and conscious step you can take. It means choosing not to feed the fire, not to continue the argument, not to repeat the same pattern. It means having the strength to stop when your habit is to push forward. It means trusting that allowing space is sometimes what changes everything. This teaching is rooted in deep discernment. It is not about avoiding effort, it is about placing effort where it will serve. A skilled archer does not shoot at every target. A wise person does not speak in every silence. There is a kind of timing that cannot be calculated. It can only be sensed through presence. Skillful means is born from that presence. Letting go can be a form of action in many situations. When a conversation begins to escalate and you choose not to prove your point. When a relationship feels stuck and you stop trying to control how the other person changes. When life doesn't unfold on your timeline and you stop grasping at certainty. These moments are not resignation, they are precision. Skillful means requires humility. It asks you to let go of your plans when they no longer match reality. It asks you to admit when pushing harder is not helping. It teaches you to move with life, not against it. And this requires deep listening to yourself, to others, to the moment as it is. This way of responding does not mean avoiding difficulty. It means meeting difficulty in the most effective way. Sometimes that means pausing. Sometimes that means changing direction. Sometimes that means doing the uncomfortable thing, not because it feels right emotionally, but because it brings long-term clarity. Letting go as skillful means becomes especially powerful when dealing with emotional reactivity. When you feel anger, fear, or shame rise, The habitual mind wants to respond immediately, to speak, to act, to resolve. But wisdom often asks for stillness. Not because the feeling is wrong, but because it hasn't yet ripened into clarity. Skillful means says, let the emotion breathe before it becomes behavior. This pause creates space for insight. You begin to see that not every urge is wise, that not every reaction is needed, that the timing of your response matters as much as the content. And when you wait, when you step back, when you let go of the need to resolve everything quickly, the right next step often reveals itself, not from force, but from unfolding. In relationships, this becomes essential. You begin to realize that helping someone does not always mean giving advice, that support sometimes means silence, that loving someone may include letting them face discomfort without interference. Skillful means teaches that presence is not always active. Sometimes it is the act of simply being with. Letting go also means releasing the need for validation. The mind often wants to be seen, praised, understood. But acting from that need can cloud your choices. Skillful means says, act for the benefit of the moment, not for your image. Speak when it helps. Stay silent when it doesn't. Release the need to be the hero in your own story. This freedom allows you to navigate complexity with more ease. When you stop needing to be right or to win or to fix everything, you can see the situation more clearly. You can ask better questions. You can shift your role, your tone, your presence. And often, what once felt stuck begins to move, not because you forced it, but because you stopped clinging. Skillful means is not about doing nothing. It is about doing the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. And sometimes that means letting go of timing, of results, of certainty. It means trusting that the process has a rhythm, that life does not need your constant management to unfold wisely. This trust deepens with practice. You begin to notice where your effort is helpful and where it is compulsive. You learn when to step forward and when to step back. You learn to recognize the difference between surrender and collapse. And slowly, your actions become more aligned, more spacious, more effective. This way of moving through life requires patience. Skillful means is not always fast. It doesn't always produce immediate results. But it builds something stronger, a life based not on reaction, but on understanding. A life where your energy is no longer scattered. A life where your presence itself becomes a form of support. Even in spiritual practice, this teaching applies. Not every session is about reaching a state. Sometimes the most skillful thing is to let go of striving and simply sit. To stop trying to achieve insight and just be with your breath. To stop fixing the self and start accepting the self. From that space, transformation happens. Not because you forced it, but because you finally allowed it. Letting go does not mean doing less. It means doing with more awareness, with more care, with more trust in the wisdom of pause. It means choosing not to push when pushing will only create more resistance. It means stepping back, not out of fear, but out of clarity. In a world that often rewards noise, speed, and performance, skillful means is a quiet revolution. It is the wisdom that recognizes. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stop. Breathe. Wait. Let the truth of the moment reveal itself before deciding how to meet it. Let this wisdom guide you forward. Let it shape the way you speak, act, and rest. Let it remind you that mastery is not about control. It's about responsiveness, about knowing when your action adds clarity and when your silence does more. About trusting that sometimes the best way forward is not to force your way through, but to step aside and let what wants to happen, happen. You've walked through some of the deepest teachings in Buddhist wisdom, not to learn how to escape life, but how to live it without grasping, without forcing, without wearing yourself thin, trying to control what can't be held. You've seen how craving twists desire, how identity fuels tension, how silence heals more than words, and how letting go can sometimes be the most powerful move of all. You've learned to spot the second arrow, to release timelines, to rest in presence, and to trust the quiet intelligence of interbeing. You've felt how compassion dissolves the ego, how retreat creates transformation, and how renunciation isn't loss, it's freedom. This isn't about doing less, it's about doing from peace instead of panic, from clarity, not pressure, from wisdom, not fear. So as you drift into sleep, let the lessons settle deeper than thought. Let your breath soften. Let your hands unclench. There's nothing to fix, no outcome to chase, just this moment, quietly unfolding, and you finally at ease within it. If something in this journey touched you, a phrase, a shift, a breath, share it in the comments below. Not for performance, but as a way to mark your path. Your insight might be the spark someone else needs to hear tonight. And if you'd like to keep exploring this kind of wisdom, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell. We're building a space here for clarity, calm, and real growth, and you're always welcome.